Welcome to the Midnight Historian, a place where ancient tales unfold in hushed tones and history drifts gently into the silence of night. Close your eyes, let the past guide you into peace as we journey through forgotten stories softly told to bring you deep rest, reflection, and a serene night's sleep. This is not just history, it's history whispered into dreams. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and leave a like and a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Now let's begin. Before dawn, you awaken in the pre-dawn darkness to the distant crow of a rooster. The air is icy cold in your one-room hut, and your breath hangs in faint white puffs as you stir. Every muscle protests as you roll off your bedding, a scant sack of straw on the hard earthen floor. It pokes at your aching back, and you feel the familiar tickle of fleas and lice that share your bed, nibbling at your skin. There is no soft mattress, no pillow, just a heap of last season's straw that hasn't been changed in months. The sour scent of old straw, sweat and smoke clings to everything. Huddled nearby are your family members, all bundled together for warmth. There is no privacy here. In the dim grey light seeping through the wooden shutters, you can make out the shapes of your children nestled against you on one side, and your spouse on the other. Everyone sleeps in the same cramped space, parents, children, and sometimes a couple of small animals, all for warmth and safety. During the night you had brought the hens and goat inside to protect them, since wild animals still roam the countryside. Not long ago a wolf snatched a neighbour's unattended chicken. You dare not risk your only goat that provides milk for your family. The goat shifts and bleats softly in the corner, adding a faint barnyard odour to the already stale air. Your hut's walls of wattle and daub keep out the worst of the night, but icy draughts still snake through cracks, and you tug your threadbare wool blanket tighter around your shoulders. The glowing embers in the central fire pit have died to faint red eyes. There is no chimney in your hut, just a small smoke hole in the roof, so a haze of wood smoke lingers, stinging your eyes and coating the thatch above with black soot. You cough quietly, a routine reaction each morning until your lungs adjust. The fire that kept you from freezing overnight is now just smouldering ash, and the warmth it gave is already fading. You know you must rouse yourself to revive it, yet your body begs for a little more rest. Lying there, you feel the dull throb of yesterday's labour in your bones, the legacy of countless days in the fields. Your hands are rough and calloused. Your knuckles crack as you flex them. At barely 30 years old, you feel as creaky as an old wagon. Living this life has aged you far beyond your years. Outside, the rooster crows again, more insistent this time. Dawn is approaching, and with it another grueling day. You take a moment in the darkness to gather your wits. In the quiet, your mind wanders. Perhaps you've dreamt of the life you knew before, except there was no before. This has always been your life. Waking in cold and discomfort, body sore, stomach half empty. For a moment, you imagine what it would be like to sleep on a soft bed in a fine house, with a full belly and warmth. But such fantasies are quickly dispelled by a scuttling mouse that darts over your foot, reminding you where you truly are. You sigh and sit up, scratching at a cluster of itchy bites on your scalp. There is no morning shower to wash away the night's sweat. No soft slippers waiting at your bedside. You slip your feet back into the stiff leather clogs you left by your sleeping spot. They are your only pair of shoes. Thick hide, cracked from years of use. Many of your neighbours go barefoot in the warmer months, but this morning is too cold for that. As it is, your shoes are so warm that the damp earth often seeps through the cracked soles. Dressing is a simple affair since you have only the one set of clothes. In fact, you slept in most of your clothing to stay warm. By the weak light, you straighten your coarse wool tunic. It's a plain, undyed brown and scratchy against your skin. The fabric is thick with dirt and sweat, stained green at the hems from fieldwork. You can barely remember its original colour. Over the tunic you fasten a belt of rope to hold it tight against the draft. On your legs you wear rough hose, essentially long cloth stockings, badly patched at the knees. They sag around your thin calves. A pair of worn linen brays short trousers underneath serves as underwear. There's a rip you keep meaning to mend, but like so many tasks, it hasn't happened yet. You own a wool hood as well, which doubles as a cap and shoulder covering. It smells of wood smoke. As you pull it over your dishevelled hair, a few lice fall out. You grimace and flick them into the hearth. Such pests are simply a part of life. Everyone you know is plagued by lice and fleas in their clothes and bedding. It's unpleasant, but you've long since given up on ever fully ridding yourself of them. There is no mirror to check your appearance, and even if there were, you would hardly recognise the gaunt, weathered face that would stare back. You run a finger over a chipped front tooth, then your tongue across the rough film coating your teeth. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste. Those concepts don't exist for you. If you're feeling diligent, you might chew a fresh twig into a frayed brush and rub it against your teeth, or rinse your mouth with a draught of water. But this morning, you haven't the luxury of time for even that. Your mouth tastes foul from sleeping, but it will have to do. Carefully, you tiptoe past your sleeping family and make your way to the door, a simple wooden plank hung on leather hinges. You push it open and step outside into the bluish pre-dawn gloom. The air hits your face with a slap of cold moisture. A low mist clings to the ground. Your hut is one of several in your little village, all clustered along a muddy path. A couple of thin curls of smoke are beginning to rise from neighbouring roofs, signs that other households are stirring, women rekindling cook fires for the day's needs. Across the way you hear a baby's muffled cry and a mother's soft crooning hush. In the distance, from the direction of the church, a bell begins to toll, calling the faithful to the first prayer of the day. The bell rings matins, though in truth it's more for the monks and priests. Most peasants like you cannot attend daily mass. Still, you pause for a moment in the grey dawn to cross yourself. Your breath escapes in a shiver as you whisper a brief prayer of thanks for surviving another night. The world was full of dangers in the dark, devils, demons, and other evils that the village priest warns lurk in the black of midnight. Thank you, Lord, for keeping those spirits at bay, you think silently. Many folk wear amulets or talismans for protection. You yourself keep a small wooden cross under your tunic. You clutch it now out of habit, asking God to bless this day. In the back of your mind lies a familiar fear, the fear of hell. You've been taught since childhood that if you fail in your duties to God, to your Lord, your soul is in peril. The priest constantly reminds everyone that only obedience and faith will save you from eternal fire, and that if you stray, you'll surely burn in hell. That fear has a powerful hold on you. It's not just a metaphor. Hell is a real, terrifying fate in your worldview. And so, standing in the chill morning, you mutter a penitential phrase or two, hoping to keep your soul safe this day. The day's first task is to fetch water. There is no faucet to turn, no sink in your home, only the village well at the centre of the hovels. You grab 2 wooden buckets and trudge to the well, the grass damp and icy under your feet, even through your shoes. A couple of other early risers are already there. You nod hello to a neighbour, a middle-aged woman with a face creased by hard work. She is hauling up the heavy bucket from the well, her breath steaming. Drawing water is heavy labour, and it makes your stiff shoulders complain. But you need this water for cooking and washing. Hand over hand you pull the rope, hearing the wooden winch creak until the bucket emerges sloshing and full. You fill your own pails. Each brims with several gallons of water, a truly precious resource, won by muscle power. Later today, your wife will likely return here to get more for the evening. Clean water is hard-earned. Every drop represents effort. You balance the yoke across your shoulders and carry the clanking buckets home, arms straining. Back at your hut, the rest of the household is waking. The children, 2 small boys and a girl, rub their eyes and pull at the itchy wool blankets. They're accustomed to waking early. They have to be. Your wife has already arisen and is stirring the fire back to life, coaxing flames from the faint embers with handfuls of dry kindling. Soon a thin plume of smoke curls up and a little warmth begins to spread. The children cough at the initial burst of smoke. Every morning starts with teary eyes until the fire settles and the smoke finds its way out the smoke hole. Your wife takes one of the buckets of water you've fetched and pours a bit into a clay pot by the hearth. With a few more sticks of wood, she manages to get a small fire going. She adds a pinch of yesterday's ashes to the water. Wood ash lye helps soften the hard water, then sets the pot near the flame to warm slightly. This will serve for washing and cooking. While she prepares, you step outside again to tend to the animals. The sun is just cresting the horizon now, painting the low clouds in washes of pale pink and gold. Daybreak brings a feeble light to the farmyard. Your breath fogs in front of you as you move toward the small lean-to shed attached to your hut. Inside the shed, you have a couple of hens softly clucking, perched on a rough wooden roost. Beneath them in the straw might be a couple of eggs, with luck. You gently check and find one small egg, which is more precious than gold for your family's breakfast. The hens ruffle their feathers and peck at the ground. You scatter a handful of grain for them, saved from your last harvest stores. Each kernel is precious, but the chickens must eat to continue providing eggs, and, eventually, meat. You also have a piglet rooting around in a makeshift pen. The piglet squeals as you dump some kitchen scraps pea pods, a few spoiled cabbage leaves into its trough. One day, months from now, that pig will hopefully be big enough to slaughter. You're already dreaming of the few slabs of salt pork it will yield. One of the only times your family will taste meat, and even then you will salt and ration it to last through winter. For now, the pig is an investment. You feed it whatever you can spare, so that in time it will feed you. Not everyone in the village has livestock. You count yourself fortunate to have a goat, a piglet, and hens. Many have nothing but perhaps a share in the village ox or a few scrawny geese. Your goat bleats impatiently from her tether. You lead her out from the shelter and stroke her shaggy side. She provides a bit of milk each day, your children's main source of nourishment. Kneeling beside her, you tug at her teats into a wooden pail. The goat's milk is warm and frothy. You get maybe a pint or so this morning, enough to add to some porridge, with a little left for the youngest to drink. The goat stomps and nearly knocks over the bucket, but you steady it with practised hands. As you rise, pail in hand, you notice your fingers are already stiff and red from the cold and the repetitive motion. Inside, your wife has managed to warm the water to a lukewarm temperature. She pours a little into a shallow basin. One by one, you and the children take a turn splashing your face and scrubbing your hands. The shock of cold water on your face certainly wakes you up. There is no soap. True soap is a rare commodity, available only if a travelling peddler comes by, and expensive. If you're lucky, you might occasionally use a bit of lard or ash to help scour tough dirt. This morning it's just water and your calloused hands. You rub the sleep and soot from your skin as best you can. The water quickly turns cloudy with grime, a reminder that you went to bed dirty from yesterday's labour. Bathing your whole body is out of the question. There's no tub here, nor fuel to heat that much water. Baths are a luxury you might experience only once or twice a year, if that. So a swift rinse of face, hands and feet will have to suffice for basic hygiene. Despite these meagre efforts, a layer of dirt is a constant part of your skin. Everyone around you is similarly dirty, so it hardly stands out. Flecks of last night's soot and the permanent stain of toil cling stubbornly to your arms. Still, the brisk scrub makes you feel a tiny bit refreshed. Now your stomach rumbles, reminding you that you haven't eaten since yesterday's scant supper. It's time for the morning meal, if it can be called that. There is no hearty breakfast platter, no eggs and bacon in abundance. Food is far too precious to indulge in large breakfasts. In fact, some days you might skip breakfast entirely if stores are low, but you have learned that working on an empty stomach is agony and makes you weak. So you try to get at least something into everyone's belly before the day's work. This morning your wife has scraped together a bit of barley flour and water to make a thin gruel. Over the fire, in a blackened clay pot, she stirs the gruel, a porridge-like mixture. Into it she crumbles a bit of yesterday's coarse bread to thicken it. The bread is dark and hard, baked from rye and barley. It's tough as a rock today, but softens in the warm porridge. There's no butter. You can rarely afford to sacrifice precious milk to churn butter, and certainly no sugar or spice. The best you have is a pinch of salt to give it some flavour, though salt itself is expensive and tightly hoarded. As a special treat, you crack the egg you just gathered. It's small and its shell thin. The hen's feed hasn't been the best over the winter, but it's rich nourishment. Your wife deftly drops the egg into the simmering gruel, stirring it to create ribbons of cooked egg throughout the porridge. The pot's contents don't look particularly appetizing, a lumpy, greyish mush, but the smell of something warm and vaguely hearty is enticing in the chilly air. The children sit cross-legged by the hearth, watching eagerly. Fortunately, you have a bit of milk from the goat. You pour some for the children to share, and add a splash into the cooking pot as well. A thin stream of steam rises as the milk heats. Breakfast is served in simple wooden bowls. You don't have a table, so everyone just gathers around the fire, cradling their bowl. You take a rough spoon carved from wood and ladle portions out to each family member, making sure the children get the slightly larger shares. The three little ones clutch their bowls and blow to cool the porridge. Breakfast is meagre, a bowl of bland pottage, essentially, but it is warm, and this may be the only warm food you get until tonight. You and your wife exchange wordless glances, silently agreeing to give the kids any extra if they want it. You each have learned to ignore the constant gnaw of hunger to some extent. The children slurp eagerly. The eldest boy, only 7, has a dribble of porridge running down his chin as he hastily spoons it in. You remind him gently, slowly, enjoy it. Truth be told, it's hard to enjoy such a plain meal, but you want the children to learn gratitude for what little you have. You eat your share slowly, chewing the bits of gritty bread in the porridge. Now and then you bite down on something hard, a grain of barley or a bit of husk. You're careful not to chip another tooth. Your molars are already worn down from years of chewing coarse bread mixed with tiny stone bits from the millstone grinding. At least it's warm, you think. The taste is bland save for the hint of salt and the smoky undertone from the hearth. You daydream for an instant about how wonderful it would be to have a bit of honey or a pat of butter to melt into this gruel. Honey is a rare luxury. Perhaps once a year you might get a spoonful at a fair and you'll divide it so everyone just gets a taste. Butter, too, is precious. Any excess milk usually goes to a thin cheese instead, which keeps longer. But this morning, there is no honey, no butter, no fruit. Summer's berries are many months away, and all the apples from autumn have long since been eaten or spoiled. So you and your family make do with this simple fare. As you eat, the sky outside the open door brightens from grey to pale blue. The sun is up, and with it the demands of the day grow louder. You hear the distant lowing of oxen from the Lord's home farm. They too are being harnessed for the morning's ploughing. One of your neighbours passes by your doorway, already on his way to the fields, a hoe over his shoulder. You gulp down the last of your porridge and take a final swig of ale from a leather jack. The ale is weak and watery, more like a malty barley water than a true beer, but it's safer to drink than water and gives a tiny spark of energy. Your village's ale is brewed lightly, you all call it small ale. It doesn't get you drunk, it's simply part of daily hydration, since water from the stream or well can be suspect. The ale is slightly sour on your tongue, but you've grown used to it, and even your children drink it in moderation. With breakfast done, it's time to shoulder the real work. Before heading out, you quickly relieve yourself. There is no toilet or outhouse, only a battered bucket kept just outside the door or sometimes inside at night. During the night, anyone who needed to answer nature's call quietly squatted over that bucket in a corner. Its contents are foul by morning, a mix of urine and stool that stings the nose. You take the chamber pot, as you generously call it, and carry it away from the hut. Some people fling the waste into the street or behind the house, but you know it's wiser to dispose of it farther off to avoid the smell and flies. You walk to the edge of the nearby stream and unceremoniously dump the bucket's contents into the flowing water. This is common practice. Everyone disposes of waste in the stream or a cesspit if one exists, though it means the downstream water is filthy. You try not to think about the fact that this same stream provides water for your livestock and perhaps even for washing clothes. Such is life. There's no real separation between clean and dirty in this world. You rinse the bucket quickly and leave it aside to dry for the day. Now you gather your simple tools, a wooden-handled hoe, a sickle for later, a pruning knife. These have seen better days. The sickle's iron blade is nicked and dull, but you cannot afford a new one, so you make do by honing it on a stone when you can. Iron is precious. You own maybe a total of a few pounds of metal in all your tools combined. As you step outside again ready to depart, your wife is already setting about her own busy day. She'll keep the younger children with her and put them to work at home, perhaps collecting kindling, helping tend the garden patch behind the hut, or learning to spin wool. There is no concept of idle childhood. Even a 4-year-old can shoe chickens or fetch a bit of water. Your wife gives you a small, tight smile, a silent wish for a good day. God be with you, you each murmur. Neither of you knows if by evening you'll be safe and well. Life offers no guarantees. With your hoe over your shoulder, you set off down the dirt path toward the fields. The sun has finally cleared the horizon, and a golden light spreads over the village. It might be a pretty morning if you had a moment to appreciate it. Birds sing from the hedgerows, and dew sparkles on the grass. You tug your hood up against the lingering chill and march onward. Already, you feel the nagging of hunger again. That bowl of gruel barely took the edge off. It will be long hours until midday dinner, when you can eat your main meal of the day. You try not to think about it. The first half of your day is spent in ceaseless toil. As a peasant farmer, your work revolves around the land and the seasons. Today you've been labouring since sunrise beneath the open sky. The village's fields sprawl out in great strips beyond the clustered huts. Your arms have swung the hoe countless times, breaking up clods of earth in the spring fields in preparation for sowing. The work is backbreaking, literally. You've been bent at the waist, hacking at soil and pulling weeds for hours. Each time you straighten to catch your breath, a bolt of pain shoots through your lower back. The sun climbs higher, and though the early morning was bitter, by late morning you're sweating under your woolen tunic. You pause, remove your hood, and wipe your brow with a coarse sleeve. Your face and hands are already smeared with dirt. The rich smell of freshly turned earth fills your nostrils, a scent that is both hopeful and heavy, promising crops if only the weather and God allow. Nearby, a couple of other villagers work as well. Farming is often a communal effort. You nod to old Gerhardt working the next strip over, who is urging a weary ox along to pull a scratch plough through the soil. The ox is lowing, and the creak of the wooden plough mingle with the sounds of crows cawing overhead. Beyond him, another pair of peasants are mending a section of fencing to keep animals out of the soon-to-be-sown field. Everyone is busy. Idle hands are a rarity here, except on the few holy days when work is forbidden by the church. But today is not a feast day, so labour proceeds as usual. Though you've been focused on your own patch, you're keenly aware of the larger obligations. Part of the field you're working is your own strip, meaning the portion whose yield will feed your family and pay your rent. But another part of your day is devoted to the Lord's land. As a tenant peasant and technically a villein, bound to the Lord's estate, you owe several days of free labour on the Lord's domain every week. Unfortunately, today, after tending your own plot in the early morning, you must spend the rest of the day helping plough the Lord's big field on the far end of the village. It's gruelling work that will not directly put food on your table, but it's required by law and custom. Disobeying your Lord's demands is unthinkable. It's considered a serious crime to refuse the labour owed or the taxes due. You remember all too well the steward's lecture last week. If the peasants don't show up for their Lord's ploughing or harvesting, they could be fined or worse. The feudal system binds you like chains of duty. You work not only to survive, but under threat of punishment if you don't meet your obligations. Thus, despite fatigue, you press on, trading your time and sweat to till your master's fields. It's galling to know that the fruits of that labour, the grain from the Lord's fields, will go straight into the manor's granary, not into the hungry bellies of your children. But such is the order of things. At least if you keep your head down and do what's required, you avoid the wrath of the steward and lord. By the time the sun is nearing its zenith, your stomach feels hollow and your throat parched. The weak ale you drank at dawn is long gone from your system, sweated out under the labour. Your shirt clings to your back, damp with perspiration despite the cool spring air. You're painfully aware of how thin you are under your clothes. The long winter left you, and nearly everyone a bit gaunt. Early spring is known as the hungry season, when the previous harvest supplies are nearly exhausted and the new crops haven't yet yielded. It has been many months since fresh food was available. You've been eking out grain stores, dried legumes, maybe a few salted root vegetables. This year was decent, so you managed to avoid outright famine, but your meals have been smaller and thinner as the winter dragged on. You can feel it now in the lightness of your head as you bend and stand, bend and stand. Around mid-morning you had paused briefly to take a swig of water from a leather flask you carry. The water is a bit brackish. It's from the well, but stored in an unclean pouch. You could taste a hint of algae and leather, but it was wet, and that's all you care about. You also chewed on a few dried peas you kept in a pocket, just to quell the most distracting hunger pangs. Others did the same. A crust of old bread here, a few raw turnips there. It's not really a snack so much as survival. At long last the sun stands high overhead. By its position, you reckon it's about noon, which means you can break for dinner, what you call the midday meal. In the fields, a ripple of relief passes among the peasants as tools are laid down. Shoulders slump with exhaustion. Some of the women and older children from the village come out around this time, bringing baskets of food or jugs of drink for those working. Your wife is among them. You see her walking over the ridge with a clay jug in hand and a small bundle. Grateful, you wave and meet her at the edge of the field under the partial shade of a skinny oak tree. It's not much shade, the tree is just budding new leaves, but it offers a little respite from the direct glare of the sun. You sit on the grass, feeling the cool dampness seep through your trousers, and catch your breath. Your wife passes you the jug. "Drink," she urges. You take it and swallow greedily. It's water with a bit of malt or herbs. Essentially very small beer that she likely watered down to make it last. Still, the liquid pouring down your dry throat is pure bliss. You hadn't realised how dehydrated you'd become swinging that hoe. Gasping slightly, you hand the jug back, making sure to save some for others. Nearby, old Gerhardt is munching on a piece of hard cheese that his wife brought, while another neighbour divides a loaf of bread between her sons. Across the field, a few labourers simply collapse on the ground to rest a moment, having no family to bring them food. For those, the steward might dole out a small portion from the Lord's stores if they're doing domain work, a gesture to keep them going. Your wife unwraps a coarse cloth bundle to reveal your midday fare. The moment she opens it, the aroma hits your nose, an actual smell of food. Despite your weariness, your senses perk up. In the cloth is a portion of pottage left from last night's supper. It's a thick mush of boiled grains and vegetables, cold and congealed now, but your mouth waters at the sight nonetheless. The pottage contains peas and shredded cabbage and a few carrot bits, whatever inexpensive vegetables you had on hand. It's bulked out with barley and oats to make it filling. If available, sometimes a scrap of meat or bone might have flavoured it, but you see no sign of meat now. Meat is a rarity for you. You might taste it on a feast day, or when an animal in the village is slaughtered, but not daily. A tiny shred of fatty bacon did go into this pot when it was cooked yesterday, mostly to lend some grease and flavour. Now that cold fat has solidified into white flecks throughout. Unappealing to the eye, perhaps, but those little fat bits are precious calories your body craves. Alongside the pottage, your wife has also brought a hunk of bread, the remainder of yesterday's loaf of coarse rye. It's hard enough to knock against the table, but still nutritious. She must have also managed to pack a few green onions and a handful of salted beans. Dividing the meal, you let her eat first. She labours as hard as you in her own way, and she, too, is hungry. Together you eat from the shared bowl, scooping up the cold stew with torn pieces of bread. By now the consistency is like a thick paste, but you don't mind. It's food. The flavours of cabbage and onion dominate, with an earthy undertone from the peas. There is a hint of something tangy. Perhaps she put a splash of sour ale or vinegar in to preserve it overnight. It's surprisingly tasty, or maybe that's just your hunger making anything delicious. You chew slowly, savouring each bite as best you can. This dinner is the main meal of your day, and you won't waste a drop. A few other workers amble over to share news or idle talk while eating. One man sits with a groan, stretching out his legs. "Ground's almost ready for planting," he remarks, staring at the furrows you've hoed. You nod. "If the weather holds," you reply quietly. All of you know how much hangs on the whims of weather. A sudden heavy rain or a late frost can ruin the crops and spell famine. It's on everyone's mind, but no one wants to voice the fear aloud. You pass the jug of drink around. As you munch a green onion, you listen to the light chatter. Talk of the Lord's latest commands. Talk of a neighbour's daughter who's expecting a baby. Soon your wife quietly murmurs a prayer for the girl's safe delivery. Everyone knows how dangerous childbirth is. Talk of a travelling peddler who came through with trinkets last week and how the steward taxed his sails heavily. The conversation inevitably drifts to complaints about burdens, the taxes, the required labour, the church tithes. Church took 1/10 of my grain last harvest, grumbles one older man, shaking his head. Tithe, they say. Holy purposes, but my children went with half bellies so the priest's granary could be full. Others nod in sympathy. The church demands a tithe, 10% of everyone's produce, supposedly to support the clergy and help the poor. But in reality, much of it goes to support the comfortable life of abbots and bishops. You paid your tithe in wheat and wool last year, failing to pay would risk not just social scorn but threats of damnation. The village priest makes that clear. If you don't give God his due through the church, you could imperil your soul. And so you gritted your teeth and handed over the sacks of grain, even as your own larder ran low. The resentment simmers among the peasants, but it's a mute resentment. There's little choice. Church and Lord alike must get their share, and you must simply tighten your belt. As you eat, you glance up at the small stone church that sits at one end of the village, its modest bell tower now silent after the midday ringing. The priest is likely inside, enjoying his own noontime meal. He's not a wicked man, Father Anselm, but he chastises the villagers often about sin and duty. He lives slightly better than most of you. The church allotment gives him a share of everyone's crops, after all. But he also offers spiritual comfort, and the promise that suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next. It's a message you cling to at times, especially on days when your body and spirit are nearly broken. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, you recall from the Sunday sermon. The last shall be first. Such words are a balm that you rub into the wounds of your daily hardship, hoping they'll ease the sting. If nothing else, the belief that all this misery has a higher purpose or a future reward helps you endure. The meal goes by quickly, too quickly. Hunger makes quick work of porridge and bread. In what feels like mere moments, the bowl is empty save for a sheen of grease and a few pea skins. You use a crust of bread to wipe it clean, not wasting a morsel. The brief fullness in your stomach feels wonderful, but you know it won't last. Already, as you rise to clean your hands, you can feel an undercurrent of hunger still there. It's rare to ever feel truly sated. At least now you have some energy to carry on working. Around you, others are similarly finishing up. One young boy licks his fingers after finishing what looked like a handful of dried apples, likely his entire portion. An older woman carefully wraps up 2 bites of bread to save for later, tucking them into her apron. Your wife hands you the now empty jug and bowl to carry home later. She must return to her own tasks. The children, the garden, perhaps mending or spinning yarn this afternoon. She gives your arm a gentle squeeze before heading off. "Take care," she says softly. You nod and muster a reassuring smile. Before returning to the fields, you take a minute to relieve yourself again at the edge of the hedgerow. There's no privacy out here. Just turn your back and do your business. Then you pour a little remaining water from the jug over your hands to rinse off dirt and dust from eating. It's a token wash. Your hands will be filthy again within minutes of working, but it's a small comfort to feel a moment of cleanliness. Many of your peers don't bother, but you recall that the church encourages washing hands before and after eating, for propriety if not for health. And indeed, with communal bowls and no forks, cleaner hands make a difference. You wipe your damp hands on your tunic. A breeze has picked up, cooling the sweat on your skin, and you feel a slight chill. The spring weather is fickle, warm when you're exerting yourself under the sun, but cool the moment you pause. All around, the countryside is beginning to glow with midday light. The green of new growth is vivid on the distant hills. Such beauty is easy to overlook when you're occupied by toil and worry. But for an instant, as you stand and stretch your sore back, you appreciate the scene. Perhaps the pottage in your belly has improved your mood a little. You allow yourself a few more minutes of rest, leaning against the oak tree and gazing out. How idyllic it might seem to an outsider, peasants dotting the fields, tending the land as birds chirp and clouds drift lazily overhead. But only you and your kind know the truth of it, the exhaustion behind each movement, the gnawing uncertainties behind each season. From the corner of your eye, you notice two mounted figures on the far road, coming from the direction of the manor house, likely the lord's steward or an officer doing his rounds. Immediately, a ripple of apprehension passes through you and others. Sure enough, a fellow worker mutters, "The steward's coming." That signals the end of the break. No one wants to be caught lounging idly when the lord's representative arrives. You hastily cap the water jug and grab your hoe. Joints protest as you straighten fully. Your spine makes a popping sound. With a collective sigh, the peasants return to the furrows and tasks. By the time the steward, a stiff-backed man on a chestnut horse, reaches the field, all appears in good order. He slows, surveying you all at your labour. He's likely checking that the ploughing of the domain's land is on schedule and that none of the villeins are shirking their duty. Satisfied, or at least finding no immediate fault, he soon rides on, headed toward another part of the manor lands. You exchange a glance with Gerhardt and roll your eyes subtly once the steward is out of earshot. These minor acts of shared humour help lighten the mental load. Then it's back to work in earnest. The sun is past its peak now, angling toward the west, but many hours of daylight remain. You steel yourself, knowing the afternoon will test your endurance even more than the morning did. Afternoon. As the sun starts its slow descent, the work grinds on relentlessly. Afternoon light spills gold across the fields, and the day grows warmer. You've shed your hood and rolled up your sleeves where possible. Sweat trickles in itchy rivulets down your back and sides. The constant bending, lifting, and walking have your muscles burning. By now, each swing of the hoe feels twice as heavy as it did at dawn. Fatigue wraps around your limbs like an invisible weight. Yet you push forward, driven by necessity and a certain numbness that comes from doing the same arduous motions over and over. Your mind drifts as you work, perhaps as a coping mechanism to dull the pain. You find yourself thinking of past seasons, both good and bad. The land can be cruel. You remember the famine that struck some years ago, when unseasonable rains ruined the crops for 2 years straight. Hunger became starvation for many. People in nearby villages died with bloated bellies and hollow eyes. Some even ate grass or bark, desperate to fill their stomachs. You recall the horror stories of that time, of families forced to boil nettles and even leather to make broth, of skeletal figures digging for roots in frozen ground. That memory is never far from your mind. Even when your belly isn't full, you remind yourself it could be worse. You've seen worse. The spectre of famine lurks whenever a crop grows poorly or a drought lasts too long. It's a fear that drives you onward when you're tired. I must till, I must sow, or we could all starve. This year, thankfully, shows promise so far. The winter was relatively mild, and the spring rains have been gentle. If luck holds, the harvest will be decent. But there are months to go and countless perils. Late frosts, summer hail, blight, locusts, all of which could dash your hopes. As you uproot weeds and turn soil clods, you murmur small prayers under your breath. Lord, protect our fields. Saint Swithin, keep the rains fair. Holy Mary, defend our harvest. These quiet invocations mix with the rhythmic sounds of work. Your hands, wrapped around the wooden hoe handle, are developing blisters atop old calluses. A particularly large one on your palm bursts as you strain to pry out a stone from the soil. You wince, pausing to inspect the damage. A raw, oozing patch of skin stings fiercely. Gritting your teeth, you tear a strip off the bottom of your linen shirt. It was already frayed. One less patch of cloth won't hurt, and wrap it around your palm. No time for anything more. There's certainly no bandage or salve at hand. You hope the wound doesn't fester. You've seen minor injuries turn grave all too often. A simple cut or puncture, if it becomes infected, could swell with pus and fever. Without effective medicine, even a trivial wound can become a death sentence. Just last autumn, One of your friends, a fellow ploughman, pricked his foot on a rusty nail while repairing a cart. It seemed minor, but a week later he was dead, his leg gone black with gangrene. You attended his burial with dread in your heart, realizing how thin the line is between life and death here. In a world without antibiotics or proper surgery, something as small as a splinter or a bad tooth can kill. You flex your injured palm and silently beseech God to keep it from festering. Perhaps later your wife will pack it with a chewed-up herb poultice if she knows a remedy. Local wise women sometimes suggest plantain leaves or honey on wounds, though results vary. Ultimately, most folk rely on prayer and luck for healing. Doctors are virtually unheard of in your village. The nearest physician is in a distant town and caters only to the rich. For commoners, the medical care available comes from herbal law, midwives, and if you're pious, invoking saints. Illness is seen as a spiritual trial or a punishment for sin, as often as it is a physical malady. When sick, people might seek a saint's relic or a holy well as readily as a medicine. Physicians in this era, if you could even access one, would likely diagnose you with an imbalance of humours or some astrological misfortune and prescribe bloodletting, leeches or bizarre concoctions. All of that is beyond your reach, so you, like everyone of your station, place your faith in simple remedies and God's mercy. Illnesses are frequent, fevers, fluxes, agues, and effective cures scarce. A chill can become pneumonia, a scratch can become sepsis. It's a constant background risk to life. You carry on working despite the throbbing in your hand. The repetitive swing of the hoe and the plodding progress down the field becomes almost trance-like. Swish thud, the sound of your hoe cutting into soil. Your mind wanders to the ache in your mouth. One of your molars has been bothering you for weeks. It's likely rotting, a cavity hollowing it out from within. Lately you wake at night with a dull, relentless pain in your jaw. During the day, chewing tough bread sends sharp stabs through your tooth. There's little you can do. Dentistry, as a profession, doesn't exist for you. If it becomes truly unendurable, you might ask the barber to pull it out on his next visit to the village, a prospect that fills you with dread. You've seen a tooth pulling the victim, for that's what it looked like screaming as two men held him down, and the barber wrenched with iron pliers until the molar ripped free, bits of gum and blood spraying. Not a pleasant cure, but it's the only permanent one. Some folks talk of toothworms, tiny creatures boring holes in teeth causing pain, and try to smoke them out with candles or herbs. You're not sure you believe that, but in any case nothing has helped your ache. You simply endure it with a stoic grimace, as you do many aches and pains. Ironically, many peasants have okay teeth compared to nobles, since you rarely get sugar in your diet to cause decay. But years of rough bread, no toothbrushes, and general neglect mean eventually many teeth go bad. You expect to lose a few in your lifetime. You've seen elders with gaps, or only a few yellow stubs left. If infection sets in from a bad tooth, it can even be fatal, spreading fever through the body. You hope that doesn't happen, another little prayer tossed up as you continue to toil. The afternoon wears on. The sun, though not as fierce as summer, still beats down steadily. You feel a trickle of sweat run from your forehead to the tip of your nose, where it hangs for a second before dropping to the dust at your feet. Your neck is likely turning red. You can't see it, but the hot sting on your skin suggests a sunburn in the making. There's no sunscreen or salve for that. At best, you'll rub some whey or milk on it, later if it burns badly, a folk remedy to take out the heat. A sudden shout catches your attention. Down the field, one of the oxen pulling a plough has stumbled into a burrow and lamed its foot. The animal is bellowing and the ploughman is cursing, trying to calm the beast. A few workers gather to help. You lean on your hoe for a moment, silently grateful for a brief pause even if it's due to someone else's trouble. The ox's leg appears injured, it won't be ploughing further today. This is bad news. The Lord's field might not be finished by dusk, which could mean the steward will be angry. A lame ox is a serious setback. Those beasts are the engines of heavy farm work, and there are never enough of them. The men manage to free the ox from the harness and lead it aside, but it's limping badly. They'll likely have to fetch the Lord's bailiff to examine it. If it's permanently harmed, the Lord might demand compensation, though how, when none of you have any coin, is a mystery, maybe more labour in lieu of. You swallow and focus back on your own work. Better to keep my head down and get my tasks done, you think. By mid-afternoon, your stomach has begun to growl again. The pottage from dinner has fully digested with all the exertion, leaving a hollow ache. You try to ignore it, knowing there won't be another scrap to eat until nightfall. Instead, you pause to take a few sips of water from the water skin at the field's edge. The water is now warm from sitting in the sun, with a faint swampy taste, but it moistens your dry mouth. You swill it around to dislodge bits of grit between your teeth and swallow. It's important to ration what you have. You can't just go refill it at will, since that means another trip to the well. So you wet your lips and carry on. As you labour, your mind drifts to thoughts of freedom, or rather, the lack of it. You know you are a serf, tied to this land and this lord. You cannot leave to seek a new life elsewhere. The law forbids it unless you somehow earn the Lord's permission or manage to escape undetected. Some daring souls have tried to run away, drawn by rumours that if you can live 1 year and a day in a town as a free person, you become free by law. But the risks are enormous. If caught, runaway serfs are dragged back and punished harshly, floggings, added labour dues, maybe the loss of an ear to mark them as fugitives. You've heard of such cases, and it's enough to quell any fantasies of flight. So you remain, generation after generation, bound to this soil. In truth, you can't imagine a completely different life. This toil is all you know. Still, sometimes when the burden is heavy, you imagine being a bird in the sky overhead, flying freely over fields and forests, answerable to no one. The sun inches further down, the heat of the day peaks then slowly eases. You and the other peasants have accomplished much despite limited tools and tiring bodies. Large sections of earth lie turned and ready for seeding. By tomorrow, you'll broadcast barley or oats across these very furrows and then harrow them under. The cycle of seed to harvest is beginning anew with all its usual uncertainty. As you strike the earth with your hoe, you occasionally uncover tiny treasures, a wriggling earthworm, a good sign for soil health, a glistening beetle larva, or even an old shard of pottery from who knows when. You flick aside the bugs, some of which birds dart in to snatch, and toss the pottery piece in a pile. The children might collect those shards later for fun. One of the younger men working near you suddenly yelps in pain. He's dropped his scythe and is clutching his leg. Rushing over, you see that he's gashed his shin badly on the sharp blade while cutting through a tangle of brush. Blood is oozing through a tear in his hose. He looks more angry than devastated. It was a clumsy mistake, but one that could cost him dearly if infection sets in. Quickly, you and another hold him steady and sit him down. Your wife, who had still been nearby gathering kindling, runs over with a strip of cloth. Working together, you clean the wound as best you can with some water and bind it tightly with the rag to slow the bleeding. He'll have to hobble home. It's clear he can't continue work today. He's fortunate in that it's a clean cut. With rest and washing, he might heal fine. But if it turns foul, there's little to be done except cauterize it with a hot iron or pray over it. The incident serves as another reminder. Every day, danger accompanies work. There's no insurance, no safety net. An injury that prevents you from working could mean starvation if it drags on, since there is no surplus or savings to fall back on. If you can't perform your labour, the Lord might also grow displeased and punish you or demand extra work later. So, many peasants work through ailments that would sideline a modern person. You yourself have often trudged to the fields with fevers, with twisted ankles, with chronic pain that never fully leaves your joints. Yet despite it all, you carry on. The alternative, stopping, isn't really an option. Your family survival and your obligations compel you forward like an ox hitched to a plough, straining until you can strain no more. And, truth be told, you find a grim rhythm in it. The steady work, however painful, has a way of emptying the mind. Sometimes you almost detach from your body, the repetition lulling you into a state where hours blur by. On some days, this is a mercy. On others, it's terrifying to realise how much of your life is consumed by unending, bone-weary labour. The light takes on a golden slant, telling you evening is approaching. Your shirt is soaked with sweat, your throat parched again, and the new blister on your hand throbs with each heartbeat. But looking over the field, you feel a small spark of pride. You and your fellow peasants have transformed this patch of earth today. What was untilled soil in the morning is now neatly furrowed, weeded, and ready for sowing. There's a deep connection you feel to this land. It sustains you, and you sustain it through toil. It's a bond as old as time, one that city folk or nobles high in their castles may not understand. This earth is your lifeblood, even as it demands your sweat and often your blood in return. You straighten up, hands on your lower back, and stretch. Your spine emits a series of pops. The simple act of standing upright and looking at the sky is a pleasure after being hunched for so many hours. Overhead, the sky is changing hue, a pale blue deepening to a richer colour as afternoon edges toward dusk. A few wispy clouds catch the sun's lowering rays. You close your eyes for a second, just feeling the slight breeze that's picked up. It cools the sweat on your skin, making you shiver slightly but also bringing relief from the stifling heat you felt earlier. Not far off you hear the church bell ring once, a signal that the day is nearing its end. Sometimes the bell rings to mark Vespers, the evening prayer time. Though you won't go to church now, the sound is a communal marker that soon it will be time to wrap up and head back to the village. You silently offer thanks that you made it through the worst of the day's work. Your mind drifts to the thought of supper. A small meal awaits if your wife has managed to prepare something. The thought of resting by the hearth, even on the hard ground, is deeply appealing at this moment. As you gather and clean your tools, wiping dirt off the iron to avoid rust, a sudden wail carries from the direction of the village. You and others pause. It's an eerie, grief-stricken cry. You recognize it as the sound of someone mourning or in pain. It could be anything. An accident, a death in a cottage, or perhaps just someone venting the day's frustration. Such cries aren't uncommon in your world. Life is fragile. Behind every hut's door there might be a sorrow, a sick child struggling to breathe, a mother lost in childbirth, an aging grandparent quietly expiring after a long illness. The wail continues, and although your heart aches in empathy, you also steel yourself. You can't afford to be swayed by every tragedy. There are too many. So you breathe a quick prayer for whoever is suffering and continue packing up. Kyrie eleison. Lord have mercy. You hear others mutter similar under-breath prayers as they, too, prepare to depart the fields. By now, the shadows are lengthening. The birds that were lively in the morning are quieter now, some fluttering off to roost. A few bats might soon appear in the twilight to feast on insects. You brush the dirt from your knees and pick up your bundle of tools. Your body screams for rest, but you must walk back to the village first. It's not far, perhaps a quarter mile, but even that feels like a trial with your legs as heavy as logs. You trudge along the footpath with a few neighbours, all of you silent or murmuring about the day's tasks. The conversation is minimal. Everyone is tired beyond words. One by one, workers peel off toward their respective homes. When you finally reach your hut, you're greeted by the scent of wood smoke and something cooking, a thin but welcoming smell of soup or broth. It's amazing how even a weak turnip soup can smell like heaven when you're exhausted and hungry. Your youngest child, barefoot and dirt-smudged, runs to you and wraps their little arms around your leg. "Papa," they chime. You manage a smile and pat the child's tangled hair. The warmth of family, the fact that you can return to loved ones, is one of the few comforts in this harsh life. Stepping inside, you set down your tools in their corner. The familiar interior of your home greets you, dim, smoky, cluttered with the basic implements of living. In one corner is the heap of straw and rags that is your bedding. In another, clay jugs and pots for storing grain, a few hanging bundles of dried herbs, and the precious iron cookpot simmering over the relit fire. The children's small carved wooden toys lie scattered. A horse, a doll. Your wife stands over the pot, stirring. Her face is flushed from the heat and exertion of her own long day. She looks as tired as you, yet she mustered the energy to prepare this meal. On seeing you, she offers a faint smile. Evening. Evening has settled gently over the village. Through the open doorway of your hut, you can see the sky painted in streaks of purple and orange as the sun sinks below the horizon. A few other households' fires flicker through doorways and smoke trails lazily upward from every roof, creating a low haze over the settlement. The familiar sounds of the village at dusk echo around, a mother calling in her children, the distant lowing of cattle being corralled into their byres, the clank of a pail as someone draws a last bucket of water from the well, and occasional voices murmuring tired farewells to neighbours. There is a collective sigh in the very atmosphere, the end of another grinding day. Inside your hut, the warmth of the hearth fire is both soothing and stifling. It casts a trembling amber glow on the walls. You remove your mud-caked shoes at the door, not so much for cleanliness, the floor is dirt anyway, but to let your swollen feet breathe. Your wife has ladled the evening supper into rough bowls. Tonight, it's indeed a thin turnip and bean soup with a bit of porridge mixed in. A couple of wild herbs she gathered, maybe nettle and parsley, float on top, giving off a grassy aroma. There's also a heel of bread to share, though it's nearly as hard as rock. You soften it by dipping it into the soup. This is a meagre meal, but at least it is warm and fills the belly a bit. In truth, supper is often just the leftovers of dinner or a pottage stretched with more water. Better than nothing, you murmur to yourself as you accept the bowl. You settle onto a low wooden stool by the fire, one of the only pieces of furniture you have besides a couple of stools and a crude table board. The children gather eagerly, each with their portion. They slurp noisily, and you don't bother correcting their manners. Survival and eagerness trump etiquette in a peasant's home. Watching them eat, you feel both relief and guilt. Relief that you have something to feed them. Guilt that it's so little and lacking in nutrition. They deserve better, you think, but this is the best you can manage. The littlest one nods off momentarily, mid-meal, her face nearly dipping into her bowl from exhaustion. Your wife gently props the toddler against her side, coaxing another spoonful of broth into the child's mouth. As you eat, you become aware of how bad you smell. A potent mix of sweat, earth, and animal odours clings to your clothes and skin. Everyone in the family has a similar aura. Bathing is infrequent and laundry a luxury. The smoky air in the hut masks it somewhat, but when you lean close to take a sip from your bowl, you catch a whiff from your tunic, acrid and sour. It's simply normal. Instead of taking offence, your wife has thoughtfully added a sprig of rosemary to the stew, its fragrance helping to cover any unpleasantness. Many people use herbs or incense to mitigate body odour, it's said even nobles do, dousing themselves in perfumes because they bathe so rarely. In your case, a bit of crushed mint might be rubbed on hands or a garland of flowers hung on the wall on special occasions. But day to day you live with the smell. Strangely, it's comforting in its familiarity. The scent of honest sweat and wood smoke is the scent of home. As darkness gathers outside, your hut interior grows more intimate around the firelight. There are no windows, only that door now shut and maybe a tiny hole in the wall covered by oiled cloth for the rare times you want a bit of light and air. But at night, you close everything to keep in warmth and keep out whatever may roam in the dark. It's stuffy and smoky, but secure. The only illumination comes from the fire, and a single tallow candle your wife lit and set on a niche. The candle's flame gutters, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tallow candles are made from animal fat. They emit a sooty, rancid smoke and melt quickly. But pure beeswax candles are too costly for peasants. They're reserved for the church or the Lord's manor, so you make do with these smelly little tapers when you need light beyond the fire. One candle is all you can afford to burn tonight. You don't have many, and each one represents hours of rendering fat from precious livestock, so tasks that require light must be done quickly or simply postponed to daylight. During supper, you and your wife exchange tidings of the day. In hushed tones to not alarm the children, she informs you that old Marta down the lane passed away this afternoon. That likely explains the wailing cry you heard earlier. Old Marta was one of the village crones, well liked and known for her knowledge of herbs. She'd been ill through winter, so it's not entirely surprising, but it casts a pall of sadness. There will likely be a burial tomorrow or the next day, with Father Anselm performing the rites. You make a mental note to dig into your stored grain for a small offering for her family. Everyone will try to contribute a little to help with the funeral bread or ale if possible. Community is all you have, and despite how close to the edge each family lives, in times of death or hardship, you all try to support one another, knowing that next time it could be you in need. Your wife also tells you that the Lord's bailiff visited the village today to announce new taxes. You feel a tight knot form in your stomach at her words. It seems the Lord is imposing an extra levy to fund some venture. Rumours say he's off to join the king in a military campaign by summer and needs coin for armour and supplies. Because actual coin is scarce among peasants, this tax might be taken in the form of additional grain or livestock. The thought makes you almost sick with worry. You are counting on every bit of your next harvest to see your family through, and if the Lord takes more than usual, how will you manage? How much? You ask quietly. She shakes her head with a frown. Perhaps an extra shilling's worth from each household or equivalent. The reeve will give details. A shilling's worth, that could be a whole sack of grain or a goat. You trade anxious looks, both knowing how steep that is. There's no choice though. Refusal is not an option when such demands come from above. You curse under your breath, clenching your spoon so hard it nearly snaps. Life heaps hardship upon hardship without mercy. Just when you thought you might get a year of modest surplus, this happens. Supper finishes with you mopping up the last dribbles of soup with the bread crust. The children have perked up a bit after eating. They quietly play by the hearth with a little fabric doll and some sticks, their imaginations transforming them perhaps into knights or princesses in a way that momentarily transcends the dingy hut. Their laughter, even if hushed, is a sweet note in the gloom. You smile despite everything. Children have a way of finding joy in the smallest things. Your eldest is showing the younger how to make shadows on the wall using their hands and the firelight, a rabbit, a bird. The younger giggles at the dancing silhouettes. In this moment of relative calm, you take stock of your body. Supper has given you some comfort, but new aches announce themselves. Your back throbs, your shoulders are stiffening, and your knees crackle when you shift position. It would be wonderful to soak in a hot bath and scrub off the day's dirt, but that is a fantasy. There is no bath. If you want to wash more than face and hands, you'd have to fill the largest tub you have, which is just a big wooden bucket, and use cold water or heat many pots over the fire. That's an effort reserved for rare occasions. Monks might bathe a few times a year. For a peasant, you're lucky to get even that. Maybe after the harvest, if time and weather allow, you'll bathe in the stream with a bit of lye soap someone bartered. Until then, the layers of grime accumulate. Your wife does a bit of multitasking after dinner. While there's still a flicker of light, she settles by the fire with a bundle of wool and her drop spindle. You watch as she skillfully twists raw wool fibres, drawing them out and spinning them into thread. It's a slow, patient craft, one of countless women's tasks that consume her every spare moment. She spins by firelight, because during daylight she had a dozen other things to do, tending the kitchen garden, milking the goat, gathering kindling, mending tears in clothing, airing out the bedding to try to reduce the flea population, though not much success there, teaching the older daughter basic sewing, and helping another neighbour woman bake bread in the communal oven. The sheer amount of labour medieval women do, both in the home and often in the fields too, would astonish a modern observer. You regard her work-worn hands and realise she's likely as tired as you, yet here she is, eyes strained in the dim light, spinning yarn so that later she can weave or knit garments for the family. If she doesn't, you'd all go naked or freeze. You can't exactly buy clothes ready-made. Each piece of clothing you wear is the result of hours of women's labour, shearing, carding, spinning, weaving, cutting, sewing. You occasionally help with heavy parts like shearing sheep at harvest or combing flax, but mostly it falls to the women. A sudden sharp scream outside breaks the peace. You jolt, nearly dropping the candle. It sounded like a high-pitched shriek of terror or pain, coming from somewhere not far beyond your hut. Your heart jumps. Was it an animal? A person? The children freeze, eyes wide. Your wife sets down her spindle. For a breath, you all listen intently, the night now dark and seeming more threatening. Then you hear it, scurrying, squealing, a pig's distressed noise. You realise a pig must have gotten loose and perhaps a stray dog, or, God forbid, a wolf on the outskirts of the village is harassing it. A man's shout follows, and the pig's squeals turn to grunts as the commotion fades. Likely the swineherd chasing off whatever it was. This is what night brings, you think grimly. Dangers that were held at bay by daylight begin to stir. Wild animals creep closer under cover of darkness. Though wolves and bears have become rarer, they've been hunted near extinction in many populated areas due to their threat to livestock. The fear of them still lives in people's minds. In some regions they still roam, and even here a desperate wolf pack in a harsh winter might wander into human settlements. Bandits, too, favour the night. Though your hamlet is small and not on a main road, you occasionally hear of thieves sneaking in to steal chickens or tools. By instinct, everyone bars their doors at night and keeps a cautious ear open. "Close the door latch tight," your wife whispers. You nod and secure the simple wooden bar that braces the door from inside. It's a flimsy defence. A determined man or beast could probably force it, but it's something. Your hut doesn't have a lock and key. Such things are more for rich homes. Here, a stout piece of wood barring the door, and perhaps a heavy chest pushed against it, is the best you can do. It occurs to you that if genuine danger did enter, you have little means to fight. Your tools double as weapons if needed, an axe, a knife, but nothing like the swords or armour of the nobility. You hope never to face violence, but it's a faint hope. Violence is a part of medieval life, brawls, raids, even outright war sweeping through occasionally. You've heard stories from your grandfather of the last time soldiers came through these parts, how they took what they wanted and left villages burned. That was decades ago during some rebellion. You pray it never happens again in your lifetime, but in this era, one never knows when the tides of war will shift and drown the common folk. The children, now frightened by the noises outside, huddle close to their mother. To calm them, she hums a gentle lullaby, an old song that villagers have sung for generations. The melody is soft and plaintive. You catch the lyrics about a shepherd watching over sleeping lambs, keeping the wolves away. The irony isn't lost on you, but it's comforting nonetheless. You add your voice quietly to hers. The act of singing is soothing for you too. Music is one of the few comforts available, and you often sing in the evenings or during work to lighten the mood. The children begin to yawn, the adrenaline from the scare subsiding and fatigue taking over. Your little hut is the entire world for your family each night. All of you will sleep here on the same dirt floor, perhaps raised a bit on a straw pallet. The concept of privacy doesn't exist. You've never had a room of your own, nor even a proper bed to yourself. At night, everyone piles in together for warmth and safety. Tonight will be no different. The straw bedding has been fluffed a bit, and perhaps a fresh layer of dried rushes or heather spread to minimise fleas. Still, you know from experience that within a few minutes of lying down, you'll feel the tickle of tiny legs on your skin. You scratch at your arm just thinking about it. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, they are your constant nighttime companions. Some nights, when the infestations are at their worst, it's almost impossible to sleep for all the itching. You and your wife sometimes wake up and spend a good hour under the moonlight picking lice out of the children's hair or from each other's clothing seams, crushing them between fingernails. It's a grim little grooming ritual, but oddly bonding too. Tonight, hopefully, exhaustion will override the itch and you'll pass out quickly. Before sleeping, there are still a few chores to finish. You take a moment to scrape out the cooking pot and rinse it with a bit of warm water. The wastewater is tossed just outside the door. The remaining embers in the fire are banked. You cover them with ash to keep them smouldering through the night without blazing. This way, come morning, you can revive the fire easily. You also ensure the goat, which is again tethered just outside, is secured and safe from predators or wandering off. The piglet is in its pen, hopefully sleeping after its fright. You can't help but throw another glance into the darkness beyond your hut. You see nothing but black night and a few stars. Still, you make the sign of the cross toward the woods and murmur, "Deliver us from evil." So many fears in medieval life condense around the night time, the unknown noises, the invisible spirits people believe roam after dark. Witches, ghosts, demons. Even if by day you don't give them much thought, in the inky stillness of a rural night, it's hard not to imagine malevolent eyes watching from the tree line. You recall the priest's stories of the devil prowling like a lion seeking souls, and you reflexively say a quick Ave Maria for protection. Inside, your wife has already set the sleeping areas. The older children will share a straw mat in one corner, while you, your wife, and the youngest bundle together on the main straw heap. You don't undress fully, it's too cold, and also there's little sense in removing garments that are anyway serving as your pyjamas. In fact, many people you know sleep naked to keep clothes from getting too soiled or to share warmth skin to skin, but given the presence of children and scant bedding, you usually keep at least your undershirt and braze on. Tonight, you peel off your outer tunic and hang it on a peg. It's damp with sweat and will steam a bit as it dries near the hearth. You decide to keep your wool socks on, your feet are chilled, and you don't want aching soles cramping in the cold. Laying down, you pull a rough wool blanket or a large woven shawl really over yourself and the family. There aren't enough covers to go around individually, so sharing is a must. The straw mattress crunches as you adjust your weight. It's not particularly comfortable. Lumps poke at you, and you suspect a new colony of insects has made a home in it since the last time you changed the filling. But when you're this tired, even a lumpy bed is better than none. Your joints sink into the straw. Your body feels heavy as lead. The children are already drifting off. The middle child sucks his thumb, eyelids fluttering. The toddler is curled against her mother's breast, eyes closed. You wrap an arm around your wife and child, cocooning them. This close, you can feel the steady rhythm of your wife's breathing. You both are too exhausted for much talk, let alone anything amorous. Any romantic notions must take a back seat to sheer fatigue. And anyway, with the children inches away, intimacy is awkward. Privacy for a married couple in a one-room home is basically non-existent. You've learned to be quiet and creative on rare occasions. But tonight, all either of you want is sleep. Lying there, you feel the day's weariness like a blanket on top of you. Every part of you seems to throb or ache, from the throbbing blister on your palm, to the dull pain in your bad tooth, to the tight knot in your lower back. It's a catalogue of agony, but one you're so accustomed to that it's almost normal. Your mind, however, is not quiet. Often when your body finally rests, your mind races. You think about tomorrow's tasks. You'll have to yoke the oxen again, or maybe do repairs on the fence, or sow the barley. You think about the extra tax. Perhaps you could sacrifice one of the pigs you plan to raise, though that means less meat later. You think about old Marta's death, and who might take in her orphaned grandson now. You think about the coming Sunday. At least you'll get a half day off for church, a small respite. But even church isn't entirely relaxing. The priest's sermons often make you feel more fearful of sin, of hell than hopeful. Still, the music and Latin chants are beautiful, and you often find your eyes tearing up at the Agnus Dei without knowing exactly why. A sudden scratching noise on the roof makes you tense for a second. Just a rat, you tell yourself. Rats often scamper over the thatch, or sometimes even fall into the house from the roof. You once had one plop straight into a soup pot. That was a memorable evening. Filthy creatures, but impossible to fully keep out. They're as ubiquitous as fleas. You remind yourself to set the simple trap you have tomorrow. Maybe catch one for the cat to eat the cat. Semi-feral does prowl and catch some, but he often prefers easier scraps from the kitchen. Your eyes adjust to the darkness. The fire is banked low, just a faint orange glow outlining shapes of the room. You can make out the silhouette of the crucifix on the wall, a small wooden cross your family prays to. In the faint light, it almost looks like a person hanging there in the gloom. It comforts and unnerves you at once. The idea that suffering can lead to salvation is ingrained in you, embodied by that figure of Christ crucified. You certainly know suffering. You wonder in your half-dreaming state if this life is your own form of crucifixion, a daily ordeal. Will it merit me or my family any salvation or reward? You wonder. The church promises it will, that the last shall be first, that the meek will inherit the earth. It's a thought you hold on to, because without that hope, enduring this would feel utterly pointless. A tear slips out of the corner of your eye unbidden, more from emotional exhaustion than anything. You quickly wipe it away, not wanting your wife to notice and worry. The room is quiet, now except for soft snores and the crackle of an ember. The children have drifted into what one hopes is a gentle dream. Your wife's breathing has slowed into the rhythm of sleep. You are the last still awake. How long did this day feel, you ask yourself? It seems like ages ago that you woke shivering in the pre-dawn. You've lived a full lifetime of hardships in the span of these sun-up to sundown hours. At least that's how it feels. Every day in the Middle Ages is packed with labour and worry from moment of waking to collapsing at night. Perhaps that's why we age so fast. Life presses all it can into each day. You allow yourself a final thought of longing. If a modern soul were to trade places with you for just one day, how would they fare? You chuckle inwardly at the idea. They'd likely break down by noon. The lack of rest, the physical brutality of the work, the hunger, the dirt, the fear. Any one of those would overwhelm someone used to comfort. Yet for you it's simply life. Not an easy life, certainly not a fair life, but it's the only life you know. Finally, you feel yourself slipping into sleep. Your mind fogs and your body, despite aches, surrenders to fatigue. You mutter a final prayer. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. A habitual line, asking God to watch over you through the uncertain perils of the dark. Many don't survive their sleep. Death can come quietly via illness or accidents, so each night has a tinge of danger. Hence, prayers are said as if each sleep might be your last. But you push that morbid thought away and focus on the relief that at least for a few hours you do not have to labour. You can drift and maybe dream of kinder places. In the final moments of consciousness, perhaps you dream of light, the warm sun over a ripe field, or an angel's gentle face, as folklore says, might watch over sleeping children. The last sound you hear is the distant howl of a wolf, or maybe it's just a village dog barking. You're too far gone into sleep to worry about it further. Wrapped in the thin warmth of your family and the fire's embers, you sleep. The misery of the day pauses, but only until the next dawn. Tomorrow, it will all begin again. The cold, the toil, the hunger, the duty, the medieval misery that is your life. Life as a serf. Up to now you have imagined the day through the eyes of a typical peasant. Hard enough, certainly. But consider an even harsher station, that of a serf bound wholly to a lord's manor. In truth, the peasant whose life you've lived is largely a serf as well, tied to the land and owing labour. But some peasants were free tenant farmers with slightly more autonomy. A pure serf, however, is essentially part of the lord's property. Now imagine you are such a serf. You wake not just to your own worry for survival, but under the legal obligation that you belong to the manor. You cannot lawfully leave the village without permission, nor choose a different livelihood. The land you till is not yours, it's the Lord's, and you are allowed to work a portion for your needs in exchange for your endless service. If you were a serf, your day would start the same pre-dawn way. A straw bed, a hungry belly, but there might be an extra layer of dread knowing that absolutely everything you produce could be claimed by your lord. Your time is not your own. The hierarchy is clear. You are at the bottom, expected to obey without question. Perhaps the steward of the manor has already posted orders that all serfs must report to plough the lord's domain fields today, regardless of what chores you needed to do for your own family. Dare to tend your private garden instead of the lord's work, and you risk punishment for disobedience. Refusing a command isn't an option, it's literally a crime. Your labour dues are enforced strictly, maybe 3 days a week, or more, working exclusively on the lord's fields, plus extra during harvest. On top of that, special levies can be imposed whenever the lord sees fit, raising funds for a journey or a war. Did the lord's daughter get married? The serfs must give a gift in produce to mark the occasion. Did the lord need to ransom a captured friend? The serfs will be taxed for it. Your life as a serf involves constant arbitrary demands. In the fields as a serf, you toil under not just the sun, but under the watchful eye of the bailiff or reeve who makes sure you don't slack. A serf might endure harsher treatment, a whip's crack in the air as a threat, or actual lashings if you're deemed lazy. Fear is a steady companion. The law will not protect you, it is designed to enforce your station. If you run away seeking freedom, you'll be dragged back in irons if caught, and likely made an example of. Perhaps the Lord will order your ears cut off, or you locked in the stocks for weeks to warn others. You've heard of a neighbouring manor where a young serf tried to flee, and, when captured, he was beaten so badly he walked with a limp forever after. Even mundane life events require the Lord's consent. Want to marry the love of your life who lives in a neighbouring village? You must ask the Lord's permission and pay a fee, called merche, for the privilege. If you marry without his leave, you could be punished or fined heavily. If a serf's daughter is pretty, who knows? The Lord might even exercise the rumoured droit du seigneur, right of the Lord to take a maiden on her wedding night. It's a terrifying prospect, hopefully more legend than common reality, but as a serf, you know you have little say in the matter if it comes to pass. A serf's children are born into the same bondage. Your offspring automatically belong to the estate too. This thought weighs on you heavily. No matter how hard you try, your children's futures are as constrained as yours, unless something dramatic changes like earning freedom or escaping successfully. Some serfs do eventually gain freedom, perhaps by saving enough to buy it, or as a reward for exceptional service, or by fleeing to a chartered town and not getting caught for a year and a day. You sometimes daydream about such possibilities, especially on days when the Lord's demands feel unbearable. The saying goes, "Town air makes free." If you could only slip away to a city and hide until you're legally free. But that path is fraught with risk. So, you crush that thought and continue breaking your back in service of someone else's wealth. Your diet and living conditions as a serf are not much different from other peasants, equally monotonous and scant. However, knowing that even the fruits of your small garden technically could be claimed by the Lord if he wished adds an extra bitterness. If a serf's family manages by great effort to raise a pig to fattening, they can't simply slaughter it for themselves without lordly permission and likely a tax called pannage for the privilege of fattening a pig in the woods. The Lord may demand the best cut of meat as payment, leaving you the offal. Every little aspect of life has a fee or obligation attached. Emotionally, the toll is heavy. You are a grown adult, yet you must bow and scrape, doff your cap and speak meekly to even the Lord's steward or teenage sons, knowing they hold power over you. Resentment surely brews in your breast, but expressing it openly would be foolish. Instead, you participate in the quiet, passive resistance of the downtrodden, but perhaps working just a tad slower when unsupervised, or hiding a small portion of grain during the tithe collection to keep for your family. You share a seditious joke with other serfs when alone. "Our Lord has a heart of stone and an arse of lead," someone quips, and you all snicker, feeling a tiny spark of empowerment that he can't hear you. It's dangerous humour, but it keeps you sane. If you were a serf, the highlight of your year might be a festival day, not only for the rare ale and laughter, but because the Lord sometimes hosts a feast for the village on major holidays. On those occasions, you might actually step into the Lord's courtyard or hall, serving at tables or receiving leftovers. You'd see up close the comparative luxury in which your masters live: roasted meats, fine white bread, even spiced wine. You'd see their colourful clothes, maybe jewellery, their soft hands that have never known a blister. It would fill you with awe, envy, perhaps indignation. Why do they live so well while we suffer? A dangerous question that has led to peasant revolts in history. Indeed, whispers of rebellion sometimes reach your ears. You've heard of outlaws in the woods who rob from lords, or distant uprisings in which serfs stormed a manor house and burned records of their debts. The thought thrills and frightens you. Most likely, you won't live to see any such revolution here. Your lot will remain what it is. In sum, being a serf means your misery has an extra layer of oppression. You experience all the same hardships, exhausting labour, hunger, disease, but with the added knowledge that you are not free to shape your destiny. Your time, your produce, even your family are considered the Lord's assets. It is a life of servitude that would break the spirit of a modern person used to freedom. yet you endure it because that is what every generation you know has done. It's God's will, the priests say, for society to have its ordained ranks, nobles above, serfs below. You, in your piety, try to accept that, hoping that if you bear your servile yoke with patience, you'll be rewarded in heaven. But part of you, perhaps only in secret prayers at night, begs God for deliverance. If not for you, then for your children. To survive even one day as a medieval serf, a modern soul would have to swallow an ocean of pride and tolerate injustices that are unthinkable in a later age of human rights. You would feel the lack of freedom like a constant yoke on your neck, as real as the ox's harness in the field. Every command you obey under threat, every extra task heaped upon you by your lord, would chafe bitterly. By day's end, beyond the physical exhaustion, you'd be mentally and emotionally battered by the indignity of it. For the serf of the Middle Ages, this is not just one day, it is a lifetime. Life in a medieval town. Not all in the Middle Ages lived in rural villages under a lord's direct oversight. Some lived in towns, bustling, cramped urban centres of trade and craft. You might think town life was easier, but a single day in a medieval town would present its own array of miseries and challenges that could overwhelm a modern person. Imagine you are now an apprentice in a medieval town, say a cobbled market town with protective walls, narrow streets, and the perpetual smell of smoke, waste and humanity pressed together. You awake not on a farm, but in a tiny garret above a shop, perhaps the workshop of a blacksmith or baker. Yet your bed is no more comfortable, likely a straw mattress on a wooden plank, shared with another apprentice or two. Privacy is still a luxury you lack. In a town, space is at a premium, so you might share a room with several others. If you're an apprentice, you effectively belong to your master for the term of your apprenticeship, often 7 years. You follow his rules under contract, somewhat better than a serf's bond, but still strictly controlled. At dawn, a town's noises wake you. The clatter of carts on the street, the yowling of alley cats, the call of merchants setting up their market stalls. The smell hits you immediately, a pungent blend of yesterday's garbage and human waste that's been thrown into the street, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread from the bakeries and acrid smoke from morning fires. Town air is foul. There is no sewage system except the gutters down the middle of the street where everyone dumps refuse. The ground you walk on is a slick concoction of mud, animal dung, slop from tanneries or butcher shops, and urine. You tread carefully to avoid the worst puddles, but inevitably some splashes on your legs. A modern person's stomach might heave at the constant stench. People toss chamber pot contents out their upper story windows with little warning, perhaps a shout of "look out below," in the local tongue if you're lucky. It's wise to keep your hood up to avoid unexpected showers of filth. As an apprentice or labourer in town, your morning is filled with work much like the peasants, but in different form. If you're a baker's apprentice, you've been up since 4 a.m. kneading dough in a hot, smoky bakery, covered in sweat and flour. If you're a blacksmith's boy, you're stoking the forge fire to white hot, inhaling noxious coal smoke as you pump the bellows. Every trade has its pains. Tanners endure the stench of animal hides, soaked in piss and lime, so awful. It's often relegated to the edge of town. Fullers tramp in tubs of stale urine to cleanse wool. Colliers cough on charcoal dust. As a newcomer to these, a modern person would reel at the occupational hazards medieval townsfolk take in stride. You might develop burns on your arms from sparks, or raw skin on your hands from constant wet leather, or lung issues from inhaling fine particles, all in a day's work, without modern safety gear or ventilation. Town life does offer some diet advantages. You might access more varied foods via markets. Perhaps you'll eat bread daily towns pride themselves on their bakeries, and occasionally some meat pies or fish if coin allows. But if you're a poor apprentice, your master feeds you mostly on porridge and the dark bread of the household, maybe some peas or cabbage. Hunger is not as constant as for a peasant in a famine, since towns usually can import food unless besieged or hit by plague. Still, as a labourer you likely live hand to mouth, spending your meagre earnings on cheap street foods like bowls of bean soup or a bit of boiled sausage. The quality might be suspect, Meat pies could contain whatever scraps the cook could find, possibly cat or rat. Food safety regulations are minimal, though towns did have guilds that tried to maintain standards. You, as a modern person, might find yourself clutching your stomach by midday if you eat some dodgy stew from a street vendor that's been sitting out since yesterday. Medieval town dwellers have stronger stomachs by necessity, or they simply suffer quietly when gastrointestinal distress hits, which is often. Speaking of sanitation, water in towns can be a problem. Some towns have public fountains or wells that are maintained. That's a perk over villages. But the same water source might serve hundreds of people, and there's always risk of contamination from latrines or butchery runoff. You might see the town crier announcing a clean-up edict. People are supposed to sweep the street in front of their homes as some town laws dictate. Some compliance happens, but truly, the sheer amount of waste produced daily makes it hard to keep up. At least in a town, there are night soil collectors, unfortunate folks who empty cesspits and latrines for a living. Still, one stroll through a medieval market street would assail modern senses. Animal guts tossed out by butchers, fish heads rotting in the gutter, horse manure everywhere horse transport is common, and so many unwashed bodies in close quarters. Personal hygiene, while slightly better for townsfolk who may visit public bathhouses if available, and if they can pay a small fee, is still nothing like today. Nuremberg had about 14 bathhouses and was considered notably clean. If you're lucky enough to be in such a progressive city, you might go to a bathhouse and sit in a wooden tub of hot water once in a while. It's actually a semi-social affair, possibly even mixed gender or doubling as a brothel depending on locale. But if you're a pious apprentice, maybe your master forbids such places, so you remain grimy most of the time. You wash your hands and face in the morning towns, often have better access to water through wells or conduits, and washing hands before meals is common, but a full bath is rare. Working through the afternoon in a town, you'd face other hazards, fires for instance. Towns are fire traps with tightly packed wooden houses, open hearths, and workshops like smithies and bakeries full of flames. It's said that a medieval city could burn down completely every few decades. There's a perpetual underlying worry that one stray spark could ignite the whole block. If a fire breaks out, everyone forms a bucket brigade from the nearest well, but there are no organised fire departments. As a modern person used to fire safety, you might be shocked at how casually people handle open flames here. Torches, candles, forges all in close proximity to straw thatch and wooden beams. The smell of smoke is constant because chimneys are few. Many houses just vent hearth smoke out a hole, meaning indoors is often sooty and your eyes burn, and outdoors a low haze of smoke lingers. Your lungs suffer for it. Crime is another aspect of town life. While rural areas have bandits between villages, inside a town you must watch for thieves and pickpockets in the crowded markets. A modern person might carry a purse or wallet openly. Bad idea in medieval town alleys. You learn quickly to secure your few coins in a pouch tucked into your clothing. Nighttime in town can be dangerous. There are no streetlights save a few lamps some cities started using, and certainly no police. A town might have a curfew bell after which honest folk should be off the streets. If you wander at night, you risk stumbling into footpads muggers or drunkards from taverns who may brawl. Town guards exist, but they're few, mainly to watch the gates and walls. If you call for help, you might get none. So a wise town dweller keeps to well-travelled lanes and avoids the notorious quarters. Every town has a seedy district near, say, the docks or tanneries. For a modern person, the noise of a medieval town would be overwhelming too. During the day, narrow streets amplify every sound, craftsmen hammering, vendors hawking wares with loud shouts, church bells clanging at regular intervals, hours of prayer, mass, and so on. Horses' hooves clattering, cartwheels rumbling on cobbles, beggars crying out for alms, children running and shrieking. There's no reprieve, noise is constant and privacy minimal. You might long for silence, but it's unattainable unless you retreat to the town church for a moment of quiet prayer, and even that might have singing or murmured devotions in progress. Socially, a town offers more human contact, which is both good and bad. Good in that you're not as isolated as a peasant in a field. Ideas and news flow more freely. And you might meet people from other regions' merchants, travellers bringing new perspectives. Bad in that you're under more scrutiny. Guilds regulate your work, neighbours gossip, and if you do something out of the ordinary, word spreads quickly. If a modern person accidentally offended local customs, say, by failing to bow to a passing priest, or by wearing clothing considered inappropriate to your class, you'd hear about it swiftly. City folk can be judgmental and hierarchical too. There's a clear respect demanded by the wealthy burghers and guildmasters. Step out of line, and you might get publicly scolded or worse, hauled before the town council or guild tribunal. Let's not forget disease, a perennial town menace. The Middle Ages saw frequent outbreaks of illnesses, and towns were breeding grounds due to crowding and poor sanitation. If you spend a day in town, you might pass lepers banished to the fringes, ringing their bells to warn people, or see people with sores and fevers trudging to a hospital more like a charity almshouse or church seeking miraculous healing. Everyone lives in closer quarters, so when something like plague strikes, it rips through the population viciously. A modern germaphobe would be horrified by how people cough and spit freely, how butcher offal draws swarms of flies that then land on food, how there's no concept of germs, so minimal hand washing beyond visible dirt. Drinking water might be contaminated by latrine runoff. It's no wonder gastrointestinal diseases and infections are rampant. In the course of one day in a medieval town, a modern person might actually appreciate some things. Perhaps the vibrancy and relative freedom compared to serfdom. If you're a free labourer or apprentice, you're not tied to land. Theoretically, you could move to another town or rise in status by mastering a trade. Town air can make you free, as the saying goes, and indeed many ex-serfs run to towns to start anew. You might sense a buzz of opportunity, markets with exotic goods, guilds that could one day accept you as a master, and a community of like-minded folk providing some social life feasts on holy days, plays, festivals. But you'd also have to navigate restrictive guild rules. If you try to practice a trade without guild membership, you could be fined or chased out. The town council might impose strict ordinances. For example, on what you can wear, sumptuary laws prevent commoners from wearing furs or certain colours, or curfews for certain groups in some towns. Women of ill repute had designated clothing or curfew hours. Jews often had curfews and distinctive badges. As an outsider, those rules could trip you up without you even knowing them. By the time dusk falls in the town, you might feel utterly exhausted by the constant stimulation and labour. As shops close, perhaps you join your master's family at a cramped table for supper, maybe better fare than a peasant, some meat stew, ale, and white bread if the master is doing well, or maybe not porridge again. At least towns have alehouses and taverns. If you had a coin or two, you could slip out after work to drink a pint of ale or wine with other apprentices, singing loud songs and complaining about your masters. That camaraderie is a lifeline. It reminds you that not all is drudgery. There are friendships, romances sneaking a smile at the baker's pretty daughter, and entertainments jugglers in the market, or mystery plays performed on festival days. When you finally retire to your shared loft, the city quiets somewhat after curfew, but there's still the occasional shout of a drunk, or the clanking armour of a night watchman making rounds. You tuck in under a thin blanket. Itching from flea bites townhomes are as infested as country ones, nose filled with the smell of smoke and your neighbour's onion breath. You reflect that while you weren't bent over a plough, your back aches from bending over the anvil or kneading trough. You've traded one kind of misery for another, an urban variety with its own tapestry of discomforts. For a modern person, one day in a medieval town would be a sensory overload of foul smells, loud sounds, grim sights of sickness and filth, and a gauntlet of social and physical challenges. Yet, medieval townsfolk considered it the price of progress and opportunity. If you can adapt, you might tomorrow make a good sale or learn a new skill. If not, the town can chew you up and spit you out into the gutter. By nightfall, you'd likely be yearning for a hot shower, a quiet, private room and clean, breathable air, none of which exist in this world. And you'd marvel at how thousands of people manage to live elbow to elbow in such conditions their whole lives, the resilience of the medieval townsfolk in enduring daily conditions that would appall a modern mind. is nothing short of extraordinary. If you were a medieval woman, shift perspective now. Imagine living this day not as a man, but as a woman in the Middle Ages. The grind of daily labour, hunger, and fear affected both sexes. But women carried additional burdens and faced unique perils and limitations that could easily break a modern woman unaccustomed to such oppression. If you are a peasant woman, you start your pre-dawn routine much like the man, waking on a straw bed in the cold hut. But even pregnancy or nursing an infant doesn't excuse you from morning chores. In fact, you likely have a baby or toddler at your breast while you work, because childcare and labour mix relentlessly. Your day might begin with a fussy infant in your arms as you stoke the fire. You are never alone. No private moments. If you're lucky, your mother or a young daughter might help mind the littlest ones, but often it's just you cooking porridge with one hand while rocking a cradle with the other. Personal hygiene or comfort is the least priority. There are tales of women giving birth in a field between planting and harvesting tasks. That's how constant the expectations are. It's not literally an everyday event, but it underscores the reality. Womanhood in medieval times, especially for peasants, means working to exhaustion and bearing and rearing many children, all under a system that views you as subservient to men. A modern woman might balk immediately at the lack of autonomy. Your husband or father, if unmarried, has legal authority over you. If he decides you should do something, you have little recourse. Society expects you to be obedient, meek and mild, as an ideal. Your clothing is restrictive in its own way. You wear a long dress of coarse wool or linen, likely with an apron. Perhaps your hair is covered by a kerchief or wimple, if your married society expects married women to cover their hair modestly. These garments are heavy and not easily washed. You've likely got sore breasts from nursing, no convenient pumps or formula. You breastfeed each baby for a long time, partly to delay the next pregnancy by the slight contraceptive effect of lactation. And pregnancy is frequent. With no effective birth control except abstinence or luck, most married women have a baby nearly every 2 years. Some do practice child spacing by extended breastfeeding or folk methods, but results vary. So, if you're of childbearing age, chances are high you're either pregnant, nursing, or recuperating from a recent birth, or tragically, you've lost a baby and are grieving while still carrying on your duties. The dangers of childbirth loom over every medieval woman's life. You know women in your village who went into labour and never came out of the birthing chamber alive. Each pregnancy is a roll of the dice. Perhaps around 1 in 20 pregnancies results in the mother's death, and even surviving. Many suffer complications, injuries, infections that there's no real treatment for. You've likely watched a friend or sister die in agony from a breech birth or hemorrhage while the midwives and priests stood by helpless. Yet you carry on getting pregnant because not bearing children isn't really an option between the lack of contraception, societal and religious pressure to be fruitful, and often the simple fact that children are needed to help the family and to ensure some survive to care for you in old age. A modern woman would be horrified by the maternal mortality risk and the absence of medical care. Medieval women put their faith in God, saints, and old remedies for protection. Perhaps you own a birthing girdle, a strip of parchment with prayers and saints' names that you wrap around your belly during labour, hoping for divine aid. In labour, you rely on the local midwife and other village women. No physicians attend you. Doctors mostly consider obstetrics women's work and rarely get involved, except maybe to try an extreme measure like using forceps or cutting the baby out, which usually kills the mother. You bite on a rag, grip a birthing stool or rope, and scream prayers to the Virgin Mary to save you as you attempt to bring forth life. If you survive the birth, you then face the high likelihood your child might not survive infancy. Perhaps 30 to 50% of children in this era die before reaching adulthood. As a mother, this is an emotional torment almost beyond modern comprehension. You will likely bear 5, 6, 7 or more children. You will bury several of them in tiny shrouds in the churchyard. Each loss cuts deeply, but you have to soldier on because others depend on you. You might quietly weep at night for the baby you lost to a fever last winter, even as you rock your next newborn, praying she'll live. Modern mothers would be shattered by this repeated trauma, yet medieval women have little choice but to develop resilience and hope in God's will. Aside from motherhood, you work nearly as hard as men in physical tasks. Peasant women join men in the fields at harvest time, often doing the gathering and binding of sheaves, bending over all day, with a sickle brutal on the back. You glean leftover grain after the men's scythes, carrying heavy bundles on your head or back. You wade into the cold river to wash clothes on rocks, scrubbing and wringing until your fingers are numb. You carry water from the well or stream multiple times a day in heavy buckets because your household relies on you for water supply. You chop firewood or gather kindling in the forest, a task sometimes actually safer for women to do alone than men, ironically, as men caught poaching wood may face fines, whereas women gleaning sticks are often overlooked. You milk the goats or cows, you churn butter, a labour that can take hours of repetitive motion. You brew ale. Many women in medieval households were responsible for small-scale brewing, a hot, sticky process of boiling mash and stirring, and all this while minding little children underfoot. Your day, from pre-dawn to collapse at night, might be even longer than a man's because after the field work is done, men often can rest or socialise while you still have women's work to do at home. Preparing dinner, spinning wool, sewing or mending clothes, tidying what little can be tidied in a smoky one-room hut. The men might gather outside to talk, but you're at the hearth, stirring the evening pottage, and also scolding a child or breastfeeding. It's unending. A modern woman might break down from sheer exhaustion and lack of personal time. Medieval women didn't even have a concept of self-care or leisure as we think of it. Any free moment they had, they likely devoted to some productive task like spinning, which could be done while chatting, hence why unmarried women were called spinsters, always spinning, because an idle woman was seen as a sin or waste. On top of the labour and maternal risks, women endure a subordinate social status. Legally, your rights are limited. You cannot typically own property independently if you have a husband. If unmarried or widowed, you get some rights, but often a male guardian is still over you. If a crime is committed against you, say rape or assault, it's hard to get justice. Courts are not sympathetic to women. A modern woman would be outraged at how blame is often placed on women for things like sexual assault. Were you alone? Did you provoke him? The community might hush it up to avoid scandal. Domestic violence is commonplace and effectively sanctioned as long as it's not lethal. The so-called rule of thumb, likely apocryphal in origin, but indicative, suggesting a man can beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb, gives you an idea. Wives expected some level of physical correction from husbands. As a modern woman, that would be terrifying to accept. But medieval wives often just hoped for a gentle husband and developed strategies to avoid angering him. Certainly, some marriages were loving partnerships, but even in those, the husband's word was final. Education for women is minimal. If you're a peasant, you may not even know how to read like most of your male peers either. If you're in a town, you might know how to keep simple accounts for a shop. But formal education is rare, except for nuns or daughters of the nobility. Intellectual fulfillment isn't on the menu. Young girls often learn only what they need to manage a household, cooking, textile work, child-rearing. Your world is the domestic sphere, yet in many ways you must also straddle into the traditionally male sphere of hard labour out of necessity. What if you were of a different class? A noblewoman or a nun? That changes some aspects but introduces others. A noblewoman might have maids to do the drudgery and would be spared field work and constant childbearing, though nobles had many children too. But she trades physical misery for mental and emotional constraints. As a noblewoman, you have zero freedom. Your marriage will be arranged for political or financial reasons, often at a young age. You may be married off at 14 to a man you've never met, expected to produce heirs and manage his castle's household. You might have more material comfort, fine clothes, better food, but you too face childbirth's dangers, and you live in a gilded cage. If you have ambitions or love another, too bad. Your duty is to your husband's lineage. Noble women sometimes wielded power, especially as widows or regents for young sons, but they always had to fight male relatives or advisors trying to usurp it. Court life could be vicious. A modern woman put into a medieval court might find it suffocating and perilous. One wrong move, and you could be accused of treason or witchcraft. Powerful women who stepped out of line were occasionally accused of sorcery as a way to eliminate them. Nuns had a different life, one arguably with a bit more autonomy, ironically, if they rose to be abbesses. But as a nun, your day is austere, strict prayer schedule, silence, no personal property. For some medieval women, joining a convent was actually a refuge. No forced marriage, a community of women, and access to books and learning depending on the order. A modern woman dropped into a convent might appreciate the relative safety from male domination, but chafe at the vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty. Not to mention the Spartan living conditions and endless hours copying manuscripts or praying at 2 a.m. in a cold chapel. Returning to the more common scenario of a peasant or townswoman, imagine a typical evening for you. You've cooked the meagre supper, fed everyone, perhaps eaten what's left on your children's plates, because a good mother ensures they eat first. You're bone-tired, possibly dealing with a toothache or uterine prolapse, a common ailment after many childbirths. Women describe a heavy dragging pain when standing too long, essentially the bladder or womb sagging. There's no effective cure except maybe bed rest, which you can't afford. Your back hurts from carrying toddlers on your hip all day plus manual labour. Maybe your husband is complaining about something. Why isn't his shirt mended yet? Or he's drunk on ale and yelling. Domestic abuse often spikes at night after ale consumption. A modern woman would potentially call the authorities. But in medieval times, who would you call? If you ran to the village priest, he'd likely counsel you to be more obedient or pray for your husband's temper. There are accounts of women banding together to scold an abusive husband or help a battered wife, but formal help is absent. You'd either endure or, if it's truly unbearable, perhaps flee, but a lone woman on the road is very vulnerable, and if caught, you'd be forced back. Finally, at night, after everyone else sleeps, you may still be up finishing a bit of spinning by flickering firelight, eyes strained and head nodding. You say your own quiet prayers, perhaps not for yourself, but for your children, that they survive and maybe have a slightly better life. You're grateful that, at least for today, you didn't die in childbirth, you didn't lose a child to illness, you weren't beaten, and there's a roof over your family. The bar for contentment is heartbreakingly low. A modern woman might in despair think this life is no life at all, just servitude and suffering. Yet medieval women found moments of joy, singing together at work, laughing at a bawdy joke in the spinning room, cuddling a healthy baby, finding pride in a well-kept home or a tasty meal conjured from scraps, worshipping in community which gave hope that all this sacrifice had a divine purpose. To live even a single day as a medieval woman, a modern woman would need to summon extraordinary reserves of strength, patience, and self-effacement. The constant physical hardship, omnipresent danger of childbirth, loss of autonomy, and societal devaluation of her voice would be a trial like no other. And yet, medieval women did it every day, often with grace and resilience that astounds us. They had to be, in the words of a later proverb, strong women long before it became a slogan. Their strength just showed in quieter, often unacknowledged ways. If you were a medieval child, now envision yourself as a child in the Middle Ages. Modern childhood, with its schooling, playtime, and parental protection, is a far cry from the medieval experience. In that era, you might be cherished by your family, yes, but you are also another pair of hands to work, and a life perpetually at risk from disease and accident. Imagine waking up as a peasant boy or girl, perhaps 7 years old. There is no soft bed or nursery. You slept on the straw pallet with siblings, or maybe on a trundle near your parents. You likely went to bed with an empty belly. Children often get smaller portions, since working adults need the energy more. You awaken early, because everyone does. No one encourages you to sleep in. The moment your eyes open, chores await. If you're a girl, your mother might set you to help knead dough for the morning bread, or watch the toddler while she milks the goat. If you're a boy, your father might take you out to the shed to learn to tie thatch or carry feed to the chickens. From as young as 5 or 6, children are integrated into work. A modern child used to cartoons and kindergarten would be shocked at how soon you're expected to be useful. There's a saying in these times, children should be seen and not heard. They are expected to be meek, follow orders, and contribute as they can. As a medieval child, your play is not entirely absent. Kids will be kids, and you might steal a few moments to play chase or make a doll from knotted rags. There are even simple games like rolling hoops or tossing stones, and on festivals, perhaps toy swords or hobby horses come out. But often play is woven into work. Perhaps you turn scarecrow in the fields, shouting and waving to keep birds off crops. A boring chore a child might make a game of. Or you accompany elder siblings to gather berries or mushrooms in the woods, which feels like an adventure but is actually important for food. Your freedom to roam might be greater than a modern child's, paradoxically, because there's no concept of helicopter parenting. Parents are too busy to hover. A child might wander with other kids through the village and outskirts, relatively safe among neighbours who all know each other, but dangers lurk that modern parents would find unacceptable. Open wells a child could fall in, rivers with no fences, farm animals that could trample or bite pigs unknown to sometimes maul small children if unattended. And then sickness. Childhood diseases like measles, smallpox, dysentery ravage the young. Half of children never reach adulthood. As a child, you likely witnessed siblings or friends die. You attend tiny funerals with disturbingly regular frequency. A modern child would be traumatized by so much death. Medieval children, while deeply affected, had to accept it as part of life. They might even be included in caring for a sick sibling, or in laying them out after passing. The concept of shielding children from harsh realities didn't really exist. Education depends on class. If you're a peasant child, you're likely illiterate, except maybe you know a few religious phrases or prayers in Latin by rote. Instead of school, life itself is your teacher. By age 7 or so, you already know how to tend goats, weed a garden, patch a roof, or rock a cradle. Medieval children matured faster in responsibilities. You might be considered an adult by the community by your early teens. Certainly, by 14, you could be working like an adult or married. If a girl, though, peasant marriages were often a bit later, late teens to early 20s, due to needing to establish economically first. Still, childhood as a time of innocent leisure is short. If you're a town child, or from a slightly better off family, you might attend a local parish school or learn letters from a priest. That means hours sitting on a hard bench in a drafty church porch, chanting alphabet and psalms. Discipline is strict. Expect earboxing or caning if you fidget or err. A modern child used to gentle schooling and play-based learning would find it severe and dull. But that education, if you stick with it, could be your ticket to a guild apprenticeship or church career. Many children, however, leave formal learning by 10 to start working. One big event in a child's life is being apprenticed or fostered out to another household. Common around age 7-10 for many trades or domestic service, especially in towns. Imagine being essentially sent away from home to live with a master or another family, to learn a trade or serve as a helper. As a modern 10-year-old being told pack your things, you'll now live with the blacksmith in the next town for the next 7 years would be terrifying. Medieval children surely felt homesickness too, but it was normalised. As an apprentice or servant, you suddenly jump to a quasi-adult role, long work hours, obeying not parents but masters who might not be kind. Some masters are decent, considering apprentices quasi-family, but others exploit them, cheap labour that can be scolded or beaten freely. There are recorded cases of apprentices running away due to mistreatment, but if caught, you'd be returned and possibly punished. If you remain with your family, by your early teens you're working full days. A girl might manage the household if her mother is sick, or be sent to help in the fields with heavy tasks. A boy might plough with the men or learn to thatch a roof. Your limbs ache like an adult's by the end of the day. Yet, at the same time, medieval youth showed remarkable resilience and even merriment amidst hardship. There were youth celebrations, like dancing on certain feast days, or joining in rowdy games at festivals. Perhaps as a teenager you join other village youths in a mischief night or something. The community did allow some revelry for young people, perhaps in tightly regulated forms like church over some Morris dances or May Day festivities. But for daily life, a medieval child's existence would strike a modern one as more akin to child labour or survival training than carefree youth. Emotionally, consider that medieval children often lacked prolonged parental coddling. With so many children and high mortality, parents sometimes kept a slight emotional distance until a child passed the perilous infancy stage. It's debated among historians, but certainly a mother who's lost several babies might steel her heart slightly to endure more loss. That doesn't mean they didn't love their kids. Many accounts and letters show deep affection and grief when a child dies. But the constant work meant parents could not dote on children all day. A modern child might crave a hug or reassurance, but mothers busy stirring pottage and fathers in the field. Affection might come in small ways. A mother quietly sings a lullaby at bedtime, which might have rather morbid lyrics by our standards. Or a father carves a little toy for a child on a winter night. Those moments existed and were precious. Illness is perhaps the hardest for a child. Without modern medicine, a sick child is treated with herbal brews or simply prayer. If you, as a medieval child, get a bad infection or pneumonia, you might lie on a straw bed delirious, your parents unable to help beyond cooling your brow or giving you a saint's relic to hold. It's a frightening scenario that countless children faced. Many recovered thanks to strong constitutions or sheer luck, but many did not. A modern child expects a doctor or hospital. A medieval child expects maybe the priest to come anoint them if they're very sick, which is basically a last rite. They grow up with the awareness that death could take them or their siblings any time, a heavy concept for a young mind. Yet children then, as now, could be surprisingly joyful and adaptable. They make friends. They find wonder in nature, picking wildflowers, or chasing butterflies might be a brief delight on the way to fetch water. They are curious, maybe listening intently to an old storyteller by the hearth recounting knights and dragons. The few times someone shares a story or sings a ballad, children would be spellbound. Oral culture was their entertainment. They probably play pretend with sticks as swords, or cobble together a little game of house, with pebbles as pretend bread. Not so different from modern kids using imagination, just with far fewer resources. If you were a medieval child for a day, as a modern person you'd likely feel hungry, tired, and possibly scared much of the time. You might cling to your mother's skirts hearing wolves howl at night, or cry quietly because your chores were too hard and you got smacked for not finishing them. But you'd also have moments of simple fun, maybe splashing in a stream with other kids while washing laundry, or sharing a secret joke with your brother as you fall asleep in the dark. Those moments gave medieval children the strength to persist. By day's end, a modern child thrown into this life would perhaps collapse in exhaustion and longing for comfort. A warm bath, a toy, a bedtime story. Medieval children knew none of those luxuries. They fell asleep likely unwashed, holding perhaps a small token, a rag doll, or a pet kitten, if lucky for comfort. Their bedtime stories were often prayers or frightening cautionary tales meant to instill obedience or faith. In short, one day as a medieval child would likely age a modern child beyond their years. It was a childhood of very swift growing up, where innocence was shadowed by responsibility and danger. And yet, medieval children did laugh, play, and find love in their families. They just navigated a world that treated them as mini-adults far sooner than we would ever dream of now. The monastic life. Consider now a very different medieval experience, that of a clergy member living a monastic life. If you were a monk or nun for a day, you might think it peaceful compared to a peasant's toil, and in some ways it is, with guaranteed meals and no heavy field labour. But the monastic routine is rigorous in its own fashion, and the austerity and discipline could be extremely challenging for a modern person craving freedom or stimulation. Imagine you're a monk in a Benedictine abbey. Your day begins in what we would consider the middle of the night. At 2 or 3 a.m., long before dawn, a bell rouses you from a hard wooden cot in your tiny cell. You are expected to rise immediately, no hitting snooze. In the dark and cold, you throw on your robes a coarse wool habit and shuffle quietly to the chapel for matins, also called vigils. The church is freezing. Your breath forms clouds as you begin chanting the first psalms of the day by candlelight. Perhaps a modern person would find some beauty in the ethereal Latin chant echoing in stone halls. But at this hour, half awake, you mostly feel the bone chill and fatigue. The prayer service can last an hour or more, a monotonous cycle of call and response psalms and readings. You stand and sit in unison with the dozen or more other monks, all hooded and pale with sleep. After matins, you might catch a brief rest. Some orders allow monks to return to bed for a little while. Others go straight to the next tasks. Soon enough, the bell rings again for lauds at dawn, another round of prayers to greet the sunrise. By now you've perhaps had a sip of water or weak beer, but no breakfast yet. That comes later. The day in a monastery is segmented by these canonical hours: matins night, lauds dawn, prime early morning, terce mid-morning, sext noon, none mid-afternoon, vespers evening, and compline before bed. 7 or 8 times a day, you must drop whatever you're doing and assemble in the chapel to chant and pray. This strict schedule can be jarring to a modern person's sense of autonomy. You have no control over your time. The bells dictate your every move, a reminder that your life is pledged to God's service on the clock. Between prayer services, you engage in assigned work. Monks follow the rule ora et labora, pray and work. If you are a literate monk, your morning might be spent in the scriptorium, copying manuscripts. Picture yourself hunched over a wooden desk, quill in hand, carefully tracing letters on parchment. It's silent, except for the scratching of quills and an occasional cough. This work demands intense concentration. One slip, and you've marred hours of writing. The light is dim, maybe a narrow window or an oil lamp, straining your eyes. It's tedious, repetitive, yet requires precision. Many modern people would quickly succumb to restlessness or the physical discomfort of sitting on a hard bench in cold silence for hours. But monks consider this a form of prayer, too, offering the labour of copying holy texts. If you're not on scriptorium duty, you might be assigned to physical labour, tending the monastery's vegetable garden, pruning fruit trees in the orchard, brewing ale in the cellar, or helping in the kitchen or infirmary. Monasteries are largely self-sufficient, so the monks do many manual tasks, somewhat lighter than a peasant's perhaps, but still hard work. You might find yourself hoeing rows of cabbages with fingers numb from cold, or hauling buckets of water to clean the cloisters. All the while, you are to maintain a contemplative attitude, perhaps reciting psalms mentally as you work. In some strict orders, you've even taken a vow of silence, so you perform tasks wordlessly alongside your brethren, communicating through simple hand gestures. A modern extrovert would find this extremely stifling. Even an introvert might eventually long for a normal spoken conversation. The idea is to avoid idle talk that can lead to gossip or distraction from God. Food in the monastery is adequate but plain and regulated. Breakfast might be just bread and watered ale, or in some places nothing at all. Some orders only eat 2 meals, at midday and evening. The main meal at noon sext could be pottage or some fish and vegetables. Meat is often forbidden to monks except maybe in the infirmary for the weak, according to the rule of Saint Benedict. Perhaps you get protein from cheese or eggs if the monastery keeps chickens. Everything is apportioned, no second helpings without permission. Meals are taken in silence while one monk reads aloud from scripture or saints' lives. Imagine spooning bland stew in quiet refectory hall, listening to a droning reading about a martyr, not allowed to chat or express enjoyment, not that the food gives much cause for delight. For a modern person used to social dining or flavourful cuisine, this might feel joyless. However, you might appreciate not being starving. Monasteries generally had more reliable food supply than peasants, though they also observed frequent fasts. On many holy days or entire seasons like Lent, they reduce intake, perhaps just 1 meal a day, no animal products, etc. So hunger is still felt, but as a chosen spiritual discipline. A modern person might intellectually grasp fasting, but enduring it regularly while still performing duties is challenging. Your daily schedule includes allocated time for spiritual study or rest in the early afternoon. Monks might have a short nap after the noon meal. Since they wake so early, this little sleep is sometimes allowed. But soon it's back to work or prayer. By Vespers evening prayer you're tired, but the day isn't done. After Vespers, a light supper, perhaps just bread and soup, and then Compline, the final prayer of the day, done at dusk. Compline is often a beautiful calming service, candles, maybe the Salve Regina hymn to Mary echoing in the dark. This might be the moment a modern soul finds the peace they imagined monastic life to have. Indeed, many monks treasure Compline as a gentle good night to the world, entrusting themselves to God's protection through the dangerous night. They too fear spirits or demons at night, hence prayers for safety. After Compline, the monastery goes into grand silence, no talking until morning. You retire to your austere cell. There's no entertainment, no family life, just you and perhaps a few spiritual books. You might spend a bit of time reading by lamplight, scriptures or a commentary, or quietly saying a rosary. Then onto the hard cot for a few hours of sleep before that pre-dawn bell tears you from slumber again. Emotionally and mentally, monastic life demands what modern people would consider an extreme level of self-denial and routine. There is little room for personal expression or ambition. Obedience is a key vow. You do whatever your abbot assigns without complaint, be it scrubbing floors or tending the sick. Even if you think you have a brilliant idea or calling, you submit to the authority of the community. Your individual identity is subsumed into the group and into your identity as a servant of God. A modern person steeped in individualism might struggle hugely with this. Monks see it as purging the ego for the greater good of the soul, but to us it can seem like a loss of self. Yet, many medieval people saw monastic life as an enviable path. A monk or nun avoided the brutal toil of the fields and could focus on spiritual matters. Education and knowledge often flourished in monasteries. As a monk you might have access to a library, time to illuminate manuscripts with artwork, to engage in scholarly debate or compose music for liturgy. Those are fulfilling pursuits if you're inclined. Some monasteries brew excellent ale or wine and enjoy it moderately. Indeed, monks often got a daily allowance of ale that was quite nourishing. In plague times, monasteries sometimes fared better if they walled themselves off, though many monks died nursing others. But also, monks had their own sufferings. Strict hierarchy and abusive abbot could make life miserable. Sometimes harsh punishments for breaking rules, fasting as penance, flogging, etc. And ironically, the boredom or monotony of safety. Some young monks grew restless and ran away, finding cloistered life unbearable. If you were a nun, many aspects parallel the monk's life. Frequent prayer, household chores. Nuns did embroidery, teaching, healing with herbs, etc. Nuns faced additional scrutiny to maintain chastity, and sometimes had less intellectual opportunity, though some nunneries were intellectual powerhouses. For example, Hildegard of Bingen was an abbess who wrote music and treatises, but nuns sometimes had less financial support and were poorer. Some convents struggled with resources, making life more harsh. A modern woman in a convent might appreciate the sisterhood and relative independence from male-dominated society, but also chafe at the lack of freedom to leave or the intense spiritual rigours. In summary, one day as a medieval monk or nun would test a modern person's discipline, endurance, and willingness to subsume self-will. The lack of sleep, constant prayer interruptions, bland diet, and silence could be painfully difficult adjustments. However, some modern contemplative souls might find a strange relief in the structured simplicity. There's no rat race, no material possession worries vow of poverty, means you own nothing personally. No romantic drama celibacy removes that, though human nature being what it is, some monks and nuns did struggle with or break that vow. Life is narrowed to a laser focus on the eternal. If you deeply believed, it could be blissful in a way, a haven of spiritual rhythm and learning. If you didn't, or had doubts, it could feel like a suffocating trap you can't escape, since taking vows was meant to be for life. leaving the order was rare and frowned upon, though some did. A modern person tossed into that life for a day might admire the devotion, but by nightfall likely say, "This is not for me." The quiet, the orderliness, the constant religiosity might drive you a bit mad after a while. And yet, maybe at Compline, singing softly in the candlelit chapel, you experience a transcendent moment of peace that is hard to find in our chaotic modern life. Medieval clergy built their world to seek that peace daily, at the cost of many comforts and freedoms we take for granted. Life as nobility. Finally, consider spending a day as a medieval noble. Perhaps a lord or lady living in a castle or Finally, consider spending a day as a medieval noble. Perhaps a lord or lady living in a castle or manor. On the surface, this life is lavish compared to all we've described. No back-breaking labour in fields, no hunger, fine clothes, servants at your beck and call. Yet one day in a noble's shoes would likely prove surprisingly uncomfortable and perilous to a modern person. The luxuries of the Middle Ages come with their own thorns. Picture waking up in the Lord's solar private chamber on a heavy oak bed draped with embroidered linens and furs. Sounds posh, and indeed your mattress might be a feather bed atop a straw pallet, softer than a peasant's heap of straw, but still lumpy and prone to flattening. Perhaps you have a canopy overhead that catches falling dust and dissuades rodents from dropping on you. You slept under thick covers the castle is draughty, and fires only warm so much. A modern person might actually feel somewhat cosy here, certainly better than a peasant hovel. Servants quietly stir up the hearth if it died down, to remove the chill. If you're a nobleman, your day might start at sunrise with attendants helping you dress, pulling on your hose tights, pouring water for you to wash hands and face, lacing your doublet or fastening your ornate belt. A noblewoman similarly has ladies' maids do her hair, lace her bodice, etc. It's pampering but also perhaps awkward to modern sensibilities. Having someone else clothe and bathe you nobles might bathe a bit more often than peasants, maybe monthly, and they often had large wooden tubs and heated water carried by servants. Still not frequent by our standards, but more than peasants. You might wear a linen undergarment that is slightly cleaner linen can be laundered, and a silk or richly dyed wool gown or tunic. These are splendid to look at, but not always comfortable, tight-fitting, heavy, lots of layers. A lady's head might be weighed down by a bejewelled headdress or veil pinned elaborately. Fashion can be restrictive, for example, knights wearing long pointed shoes or women in gowns trailing impractically on floor. But as a noble you endure it as a status symbol. Breakfast is light, maybe bread with butter, maybe some wine or ale. Nobles don't typically gorge in the morning. You might spend the morning on administration, meeting your steward to review the estate's accounts, settling disputes among your vassals or peasants like a manor court day. A modern person might find this part relatively easy, essentially meetings and paperwork, albeit medieval style. But if you're a noble in a high position, say a baron at court, you might have to attend upon the king or engage in political intrigue. Life at court, the royal court or regional prince's court is perilous socially. You must show etiquette and subservience to those above, while keeping those below in their place. One slip of the tongue before the king could cost you your favour, or even your head monarchs could be volatile. You navigate political factions. A modern person might liken it to a deadly office politics or Game of Thrones scenario. The stress of maintaining your land, defending your honour, and pleasing your sovereign is intense. If you're a knight or lord in martial prime, part of your day might be training, sparring with swords, practicing jousting on the quintain, a rotating dummy target, hunting on horseback in the forests. Nobles often hunted daily. It was sport and also practical for fresh meat. You mount your well-bred horse, horn and hounds at the ready, and gallop through woods chasing deer or boar. Exciting, yes, but also dangerous. Hunting accidents are common falls from horses, boar gorings. A modern person might not be an adept rider or archer, making these tasks daunting. If you capture nothing, your table lacks delicacies. Success in hunting also has a pride element among peers. Later, Maybe you hold a training melee with your men-at-arms, swinging heavy swords or lances, exhausting physical work, even for a lord, but considered essential. A medieval nobleman must be battle-ready. He likely bears old wound scars from wars or tournaments. If war is on, a lord might daily receive messengers of siege or battle, planning strategy. No easy burden. The threat of violence is constant. A rival lord might raid your lands, a peasant revolt could stir, or the king might demand you bring troops to his campaign. A modern person, used to relative peace, would feel underlying anxiety at how normal war and fighting are to this class. A noblewoman's day is different, but also tightly managed. She oversees the castle household, managing many servants, allocating supplies, perhaps spinning or embroidery with her ladies as a show of virtue and to pass time. Noble women might also handle estate business. When husbands are away, they could be quite capable administrators, but they also might spend hours in the bower doing fine needlework, which to a modern person could seem tedious, though luxurious not to have to toil outside. A highborn lady also has to maintain appearances, dressing elegantly, comporting gracefully, perhaps learning music lute, harp to entertain. It's a gilded cage scenario, all comforts but not much freedom. If unmarried, her parents likely dictate her moves. If married, she's often confined to ladylike spheres, though some break out hunting, commanding defences in husband's absence, etc., as some historical noblewomen did. Meals for nobility are the stuff of legend, great feasts in the great hall with dozens of courses, roast meats, pies, exotic spices, jellies, alcohol flowing. As a modern person, the first time might wow you. The flavours are very different, heavy use of cinnamon, clove, ginger in meat dishes, sweet and sour sauces, etc. You might enjoy the richness. Finally, meat and white bread are plenty, but do note, with no forks they came later. In some places late medieval, but still uncommon. You eat with fingers and a personal eating knife. Your hands get greasy. A basin is passed after courses to rinse. Hygiene is not modern. Communal dishes, people dipping bread in sauces, and remember, those lovely spices cover up sometimes not so fresh meat. You could easily get indigestion. Nobles often did. Gluttony and drunkenness at feasts are common. A modern digestive system used to refrigerated foods might find certain heavily salted or preserved items hard to handle. Also, the sheer quantity, guests are expected to try everything, and waste is fine because leftovers go to servants. You might see grotesque dishes too, a peacock sewn back into its feathers as a display, or a meat gelatin shaped fancifully. It's spectacle as much as sustenance. Feasts can last hours with entertainment minstrels, jugglers. As a noble, you can partake or withdraw at will. At least you have the comfort of luxury. But you must also mind courtly manners, knowing how deep to bow, how to address high table when it's proper to speak. Faux pas could embarrass you or insult someone, and there's always someone gossiping or plotting. One thing nobility suffer from: health issues from excess and lack of modern medicine. Gout joint pain from rich diet is so common it's called the rich man's disease. Dental problems from sugar, if you can afford sugar. Although ironically medieval nobles had less sugar than later periods, but they did eat a lot of white bread, which can cause dental plaque due to fine flour. They don't brush as we do, maybe rinse mouth with wine or chew herbs. You as a noble might have blackened or missing teeth by your 40s, but it's considered normal, or you hide it by smiling carefully. Some did use early tooth powders of charcoal or salt. Also, nobles do get sick and injured. If you fall in battle or joust, you might get better care than a peasant. Maybe a surgeon sets your bone, which still might be horribly painful and done without anaesthetic beyond wine or herbal sedative. But ultimately, they too have no antibiotics. Many a young lord died of infection from a small wound, or of pneumonia after a chill in a damp castle. Castles are cold and often damp stone walls seep moisture. A modern person might catch a nasty cold sleeping in a castle in winter. Tapestries and hearth, fires only do so much to warm it. Privacy is also limited. Nobles are surrounded by attendants. A lord has squires and pages trailing him, a lady has handmaidens. You rarely get a moment alone. Even your bedchamber might be shared with spouse or have a servant sleeping nearby in case needed. You can't just walk out to town for a stroll. High status confines you to your estates or accompanied trips. A modern person might feel stifled by constant ceremony and supervision. Perhaps the greatest difference for nobility is the ever-present danger from peers and politics. As a noble, you're always aware your fortune could turn. The king might fall out with you and seize your lands. Your neighbour might covet your castle and besiege it. If you're a high noble, one political misstep, and you could be executed or exiled. Many medieval nobles faced their headsman's axe due to court intrigue or rebellion. That kind of high-stakes anxiety is something modern wealthy people seldom face. You might go to bed wondering if you'll be called to war by spring, or if your heir will survive childhood to carry on your line. In contrast, yes, the nobility enjoy leisure unknown to others. Hunting, hawking trained falcons, catching prey. A favourite noble pastime, quite elegant, music and poetry. Maybe you sponsor troubadours to sing love ballads, or you play chess by the fire while sipping spiced wine. Noble women might do elaborate embroidery or read romances. Noble men might have clerics read to them or enjoy gambling with dice. Love affairs can happen, though risky. A scandal could ruin a lady or cause a duel. There's an emotional emptiness sometimes described in noble letters. Some lament the lack of true friends because everyone is manoeuvring, or the boredom between wars and duties. A modern person might relish the comfort for a while, then find the gilded life hollow, missing purpose beyond status games. By the end of a noble's day, you retire to your bed with fine linens, maybe warmed by a pan of coals slid under covers by a servant. You might write in a journal by candlelight. Yes, nobles kept journals or dictated letters, if literate. Many were. You pray, for you too fear God and hell, maybe more so because you have more to answer for, having enjoyed earthly delights. The castle falls quiet, save for guards on the walls and the howl of wind outside. If it's a dangerous time, you might post extra watchmen, sleeping with a dagger under your pillow. You hope your food wasn't poisoned by an enemy, a legitimate worry in some courts. A modern person living this day might physically enjoy the softness of a feather bed and a hearty roast at dinner. But you would also feel the weight of constant scrutiny and threat that accompanies nobility. The freedom from manual labour is replaced by the bondage of duty politics, and often violent responsibility leading men in battle, dispensing harsh justice. You might have to sentence a thief to hanging or a poacher to mutilation. Those decisions rest on you as lord. That could haunt you. In short, one day as a medieval noble offers comfort and plenty beyond imagination of a peasant's day, yet it's far from carefree or safe by modern standards. You'd emerge from it likely grateful for modern law, medicine, and the ability to be a private citizen without a bullseye on your back. Nobility in the Middle Ages lived well, but often died violently or young despite it. Their stress was just of a different sort, subtle, psychological, but very real. Surviving one day would be easy. Surviving a lifetime in that high castle could break you in other ways. Conclusion. We have journeyed through a single, notional day in the Middle Ages, experiencing it through many eyes: peasant, serf, townsfolk, woman, child, monk, and lord. What emerges is a tapestry of hardship and unimaginable resilience. No matter your station in medieval society, life demanded a toughness of body and spirit that would astonish most of us today. If you, a modern person with modern comforts, truly found yourself living just one day in that world, you would feel as though you had been dropped onto an alien planet. From the moment of waking in a louse-infested bed on an empty stomach, toiling from dawn to dusk in pain, fear and dirt, to the moment of collapsing into fitful sleep on that same scratchy straw, your senses and sanity would be overwhelmed. Hours would crawl. By midday, your uncalloused hands might bleed, your back might seize up, your head might spin from thirst or hunger. By night, psychological strain, whether the serf's lack of freedom or the noble's constant vigilance, would fray your nerves. You would gain a profound appreciation for the simplest modern amenities: a soft mattress, a hot shower, a painkiller for an aching head, a secure roof and locked door, a police force that keeps bandits at bay, a doctor to call if your child falls ill. One day in the Middle Ages would likely feel like a week, if not more, to you. Time moves slowly when you are uncomfortable and anxious at every turn. And in medieval life, discomfort and anxiety were faithful companions. The day's labour was backbreaking and seemingly endless. The hunger gnawing at your belly was never far from mind, because you could never be sure when the next bad harvest or famine might strike. If you were of the poor, as the vast majority were, your entire day's purpose was just to survive to the next. If you were of the rich, your day was spent maintaining power and fearing its loss, a different kind of grind. Every class had its chains, literal or metaphorical. Spiritually and psychologically, the medieval day was saturated with fear and faith intertwined. Fear of hell's fire if you shirked your duty, fear of the Lord's whip or the Earl's sword if you stepped out of line, fear of invisible demons or witches at night, fear of very real diseases that struck without warning, and faith, the only anchor that suffering now would translate to salvation later. It was this hope that kept many going. They truly believed this life of misery was part of God's plan, a test or a punishment for original sin, but that enduring it well would earn them paradise. A modern person, perhaps less accustomed to integrating daily suffering with cosmic meaning, might feel despair creeping in where a medieval person's faith gave them resilience. By the end of your medieval day, you would likely be physically broken and emotionally raw. The quiet at night would be pierced by the sound of your own racing thoughts. How do they live like this, day after day, year after year, a whole lifetime? You might think of the people you met in this single day, the peasant mother humming a lullaby over her sleeping child's corpse because half her children die young, the old serf with a permanently bent spine from decades in the furrows, the apprentice with fresh burns on his arms forging his master's sword, the noblewoman married off at 14, lonely in her tower weaving tapestries of heroes while feeling like a prisoner. You would realise that those tales of knights and ladies in shining castles gloss over a reality where even the privileged bathe seldom and sleep in fear, and that the simple life of the countryside was simply brutal. Returning to your own comfortable era after this day would likely move you to tears of relief. The heat from a radiator, the softness of a pillow, the ease of flicking on a light after dark, the security that tomorrow's meals are assured, and that if you fall gravely ill an ambulance will whisk you to care. These would all seem like miracles. Perhaps you would carry a new wisdom that nearly everything we consider necessities, abundant food, clean water, sanitation, medicine, personal safety, even basic literacy, are luxuries that most humans throughout history lived without. And you might ponder how those people managed to find moments of love, joy, and meaning amid such adversity. One day in the Middle Ages would indeed break you, if not physically, then emotionally or morally. It would feel like an eternity, because every moment is filled with some struggle or discomfort. Our modern complaints would pale after experiencing that. You might never again grumble about slow internet or a lumpy mattress after spending a medieval night with straw poking your ribs and fleas feasting on you. In concluding this meditation on a medieval day, we circle back to the idea that for them it wasn't one day, it was every day, a lifetime of toil and faith. And generation after generation, they persevered. It is a stark reminder that the comforts, safety, and freedoms we enjoy are extremely recent gifts in the human story. You, living now, have the luxury to contemplate the Middle Ages as an academic curiosity precisely because countless ancestors endured it and slowly built a better world out of its trials. As you return to your soft-spoken, slow-paced modern life, take with you the image of dawn in a medieval village, a line of tired, brave souls bending to the fields, their breath misting in the cold air, each carrying burdens we can scarcely fathom yet bound together by necessity and hope. Imagine yourself among them for that endless day and let gratitude swell in your chest for all the countless days of progress since. Surviving one day in the Middle Ages would feel like a week. Indeed, it could very well be the longest day of your life. And having survived it, you carry a newfound awe for the fragility and preciousness of what we now call everyday life. In the quiet of your evening, you might light a candle, for now you understand how cherished light is in darkness, and silently thank those who came before. The medieval misery they endured has, through many turning gears of history, granted you the comfortable existence you know, and whenever life feels hard, you can recall that day you lived in their world, and perspective will wash over you. By modern measure, you have so much. Thus, the Middle Ages, in all their misery, offer us a mirror to appreciate our fortunes. One day in that era would break you, but reflecting on it can also strengthen you to face your own trials with a bit more courage, knowing that human beings have borne far worse and continued to strive, and to cherish the dawn of each day in this safer, softer world that, not very long ago, would itself seem like heaven to those poor souls waking on their bed of straw. Sources, medieval life details and hardships have been drawn from historical records and scholarly research. For instance, peasant living conditions, straw beds, fleas, lack of hygiene are documented in manorial rolls and studies. The oppressive labour and hunger are noted in medieval chronicles and modern analyses of peasant diets. Church influence and fear of hell on daily life are attested by church writings and sermons of the time. Child mortality rates and women's childbirth dangers are evidenced by archaeological and textual data. The constant threat of punishment under feudal law is recorded in legal texts and literature. All these and more paint the picture that, compared to our lives now, medieval everyday reality was harsh beyond our full comprehension. The people of that age survived it because they knew no other and adapted from birth. We, dropped into it suddenly, would likely be overwhelmed within a single sun's passage, a powerful testament to human resilience then and human progress since. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with the Midnight Historian. If tonight's story helped you find calm, please consider subscribing to join us again under the stars. Leave a like or a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of the past lull you into peace.